She watched for a while longer and saw that Immerse had already gone to the door of the villa. She seemed to be guarding the door on purpose, not wanting to be disturbed by other servants. Jean paused for a moment, got up and was about to go out, but then she hesitated and picked up her cell phone to call Uncle O, but his cell phone was turned off. She guessed that he had gone to bed because it was too late. Jean could only walk out quickly. As soon as she arrived at the door of the villa, she walked in without saying a word. What are you doing? Immerse was guarding the door. Seeing that Jean was going to force her way in, she quickly came over and gave Jean a push. However, not only was Jean not pushed away, but Immerse was pushed back a few steps by Jean's quick movement. She almost lost her balance and staggered before glaring at Jean. Hiss, you're quite strong. What are you doing here in the middle of the night? Jean coldly raised her eyes and looked at her. I just came out of the villa across the street. Why? Can't I enter this villa? Of course not. You and Jingshan have divorced. This is Jingshan's place. Why did you go in so late at night? Really? The smile in Jean's beautiful eyes was slightly cold, but Immerse couldn't help shivering in the summer. Then who can enter? Your daughter? Jean smiled, getting straight to the point. What are you talking about? My daughter? Joshua is sleeping soundly in the room. I suddenly have something to talk to Jingshan about. I don't know if he is resting now, so I stood here for a while. Jean, I warn you, don't talk nonsense in the Immerse family. You are no longer the granddaughter-in-law of the Immerse family. No one can support you. Just stay here for one night and leave. Why are you everywhere? Aunt, since we're talking about the Immerse family, you should know what you can and can't do. It's already good enough that you're able to stay in the Immerse family just because the elder is soft-hearted. Right now, if you're bold enough to go against Jingshan's gun, are you sure the two of you can bear the consequences? Jean's smile was cold. Immerse sneered and still refused to admit her mistake. I don't understand what you're talking about. After all, you are not a member of the Immerse family now. The Immerse family is not a place where you can go wherever you want. Anyway, you can't enter Jingshan's place. Go. With that, she stood in front of the door and raised her arm to block the door. Jean coldly looked at her, glanced at the quiet villa, and raised her eyes to look upstairs. The lights were still on, but she could not see anyone. Joshua had been in the room for so long. In fact, Jean also hesitated. Was it necessary for her to meddle in this kind of business? What if Jingshan was willing to fall into this trap? What if she went in to stop him now and interrupted him? Even though Jean knew Jingshan was not such a person, it seemed that she really had no reason to stop him. Immerse seemed to notice Jean's hesitation and immediately sneered. Jean, take a look at yourself. The Immerse family has nothing to do with you. It's just that the elder misses you. That's why he asked you to come over for a meal and stay for a night. Tomorrow, won't you still part ways with him? You are no longer a member of the Immerse family. Just look at yourself and keep your place. Why are you meddling in other people's business? Seeing that Immerse didn't want to leave, Jean looked calm, but her heart was inexplicably agitated. She glanced down at the time. She calculated and found that Joshua had been in the room for at least 20 minutes. If Jingshan wanted to drive her away, he would have done so long ago. Why did he need her, an outsider, to come here? Thinking of this, Jean frowned, didn't speak, and turned to leave. Chapter 504. Seeing where Jean was looking, Immerse hurriedly clenched the thing in her hand tighter and hid her hands behind her back. Jean smiled and then her smile cooled down. She came up to her. Aunt, you're so thoughtful. You're afraid that he won't eat that bowl of food, so you asked Joshua to rub this aphrodisiac on her body in advance? Immerse's eyes panicked. What nonsense are you talking about, Jean Wan was young and had never had contact with people in the black market. How could she know about this thing? Jean Wan smiled. You probably don't know where this thing is made. When I was in London, my business competitor had a company that specialized in making these kinds of sex toys. These things are very popular abroad and can be seen in some drugstores near bars. You can only buy them in China through the black market. Do you think I haven't seen them? At the moment when Mo Pylon froze, Jean Wan suddenly turned around and walked in quickly. When Mo Pylon came back to herself and was about to reach out to stop her, Jean Wan had successfully crossed her line of defense and broke in smoothly. What are you doing? Come out. Seeing Jean Wan going upstairs quickly in a pair of indoor slippers, Mo Pylon hurriedly stepped forward and grabbed Jean Wan's clothes, reached out to pull her back and stepped on the slippers under her feet. She couldn't let Jean Wan go up and ruin her daughter's plan. Jean Wan paused because of her feet and looked coldly at Mo Pylon's clenched teeth. She was in a hurry when she went downstairs just now, so she just put on a pair of slippers. She glanced at the smooth and shiny marble floor of the villa, including the stairs which were also made of smooth marble. She simply threw off the slippers on her feet, and at the same time, waved Mo Pylon's arm away, and quickly walked up again. Stop. Mo Pylon did not expect that although Jean Wan looked so thin, she was actually so strong and nimble. She was in her 50s, and she could barely stand still. She rushed up, panting. When Jean Wan had successfully reached the second floor, Mo Pylon suddenly made up her mind and grabbed Jean Wan's hair. When Jean Wan paused because of the pain, Mo Pylon took the opportunity to reach out her hands and choke her hard. Her eyes were red as she strangled her and glared at her. Don't you dare ruin my daughter's plan. I'm telling you. From today onwards, my daughter can't just follow my surname. I want her to truly become a member of the Mo family. Jean Wan, you can forget about having anything to do with Jing Shen in this lifetime. Strangled so hard and almost pushed down the stairs by her sudden brute force, Jean Wan hurriedly raised her hand to grab the handrail on the stairs to steady herself. Looking up at Mo Pylon's almost crazy expression, Jean Wan sneered and suddenly raised her other hand to grab Mo Pylon's wrist. Mo Pylon felt a sudden pain and numbness in her wrist. Before she could react, Jean Wan suddenly grabbed both of Mo Pylon's hands, and in the blink of an eye, Jean Wan turned the one who had been strangled into herself. Jean Wan looked deadpan at Mo Pylon, who was suddenly thrown away, put a little force on her wrist, and saw Mo Pylon's pale and incredulous expression in pain. You. Mo Pylon stared at her blankly, completely unable to understand how Jean Wan suddenly broke free from her and then restrained her. If it weren't for the title of an elder, I would have slapped you so hard that you wouldn't even remember your surname. As Jean Wan finished speaking, she suddenly loosened her hand, and Mo Pylon immediately staggered back and sat on the ground unprepared. Jean Wan turned and walked quickly toward Mo Jingshen's room. Seeing that Jean Wan had walked over, Mo Pylon struggled to sit up from the ground, stroked her waist that was almost broken from the fall, pounced on Jean Wan, and pressed her against the door. She raised her hand to cover Jean Wan's mouth so that she wouldn't disturb the people in the room. Jean Wan didn't expect that Mo Pylon would really use all kinds of dirty tricks in order to stay in the Mo family, nor did she expect that she could still be so strong at this time. Mo Pylon tugged at the clothes on Jean Wan's shoulders to drag her away. As the two were tearing at each other, the ring on Mo Pylon's finger left a red mark on Jean Wan's neck. This time, Jean Wan was in so much pain that she no longer cared about her aunt's face and slapped her hard. Mo Pylon was slapped so hard that she took a step back. The left side of her face hurt so much that she was stunned. Jean Wan's face was cold, and she said word by word coldly, "It's disgusting for someone so old to be so shameless." You. Jean Wan leaned against the door. The pain on her neck made her frown unhappily. She raised her hand and rubbed her neck. Sure enough, there was blood. Even if you're stupid, there should be a limit. Do you think you can survive in the Mo family after tonight? Mo Pylon's eyes were red. She put down the hand covering her face and rushed up to strangle Jean Wan's neck again, as if she wouldn't stop until she strangled Jean Wan to death. As soon as she rushed over, Jean Wan was thrown against the door. All of a sudden, the door behind Jean Wan was opened without warning. She instantly lost her balance and fell backward. The man in the door caught her just in time, and she fell into a familiar embrace. Jean Wan stiffened. She raised her eyes to see the man whose eyes were clear and not affected by the drug at all. At the same time, he was neatly dressed and handsome. Before she could react, the man's arm circled around her waist and brought her into his arms. Seeing the door open, Mo Pailan's red eyes froze. She stared blankly at Mo Jingshan, who didn't show any signs of intimacy and even acted as if nothing had happened. You. Jingshan. Mo Pailan's eyes immediately panicked. She wanted to look into the room to see where Mo Jiashue was. Jean Wan also looked at Mo Jingshan, and the tense string in her mind immediately loosened. She asked with a straight face, "Are you all right?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the obvious red mark on her neck, which was still seeping with a faint trace of blood. He coldly narrowed his eyes, hiding all his emotions. He held her in his arms without letting go, asking softly, "How did you get hurt?" Only then did Jean Wan remember the wound on her neck. At the same time, she returned to herself and rushed to struggle out of his arms. However, the man's arm was firmly circled around her waist. Chapter 505. As Mo Jingshan lowered his head to look at the wound on Jean Wan's neck, he glanced at her feet that were stepping on the cold floor. His voice was light with some displeasure. "You're not wearing shoes? Are you complaining that your body is not cold enough?" Jean Wan lowered her eyes to look at her own feet. Under the man's gaze, her toes could not help but curl up. It was not that she was not wearing slippers. It was just that it was inconvenient for her to walk in them after being stepped on by Mo Pailan, so she decided to take them off at the stairs. Then she heard the man's cold voice with a hint of a smile. "There is a fire escape on the second floor of the villa that leads to the back door. I only told Mo Jiashue one sentence. If she dares to take a single step into my room tonight, I'm afraid there will no longer be a place for the two of you in this huge Haicheng." His words were directed at Mo Pailan. Jean Wan immediately raised her eyes to look at Mo Pailan, whose face had instantly paled. "You." Mo Pailan's eyes were flustered. There was indeed more than one door in this villa. Earlier, she was guarding the front door, thinking that it would be fine as long as she did not allow anyone to enter and disturb them. However, she neglected to consider whether Mo Jiashue would escape from the back. "Although your daughter doesn't have her own opinions, she understands the stakes better than you. Compared to bringing that bowl of soup through my door and incurring my disgust, at least she knows when to advance and when to retreat." Mo Jingshan's voice was extremely light. Mo Pailan's gaze met his cold, thin smile. She wanted to say something but paused. No, she had to find Jiashue and clarify things. Before she left, she suddenly glanced at Jean Wan with a cold and mocking smile. "Aren't you guys already divorced?" After finishing her words, under Jean Wan's even stiffer expression, she rushed to the back door. She pushed open the back door and saw that the bowl of white fungus soup had indeed been smashed on the ground. She immediately trembled in anger. This damn brat. However, the moment Mo Pailan left, she rushed to struggle out of Mo Jingshan's embrace. The man only lowered his eyes to glance at her expression. Without speaking, he directly carried her into the door, and slammed it shut with a bang. The moment she was abruptly carried into the room, the familiar surroundings caused Jean Wan's hair to stand on end. This was not Mo Jingshan's room alone. 3 years ago, when they were still lovey-dovey, this was the room they had stayed in together. The past was still vivid in her mind. She pushed him hard with both hands, but the man directly carried her onto the bed. The moment her body touched the bed, she immediately jumped up. "Don't move." Mo Jingshan glanced at the wound on her neck. As he picked up his phone, he asked coldly, was it scratched by your nails? Jean Wan did not answer. She raised her hand to touch the place on her neck that was still faintly aching. However, before she could touch it, the man abruptly grabbed her wrist. She didn't know who had called, but he said, "Mo at Shen, G Nguyen at G." Jean Wan was about to shake his hand off when she heard the man speak into the phone, "Send the first aid kit over." After finishing his words, he tossed the phone aside and glanced at Jean Wan's toes, which were curled up by the bed due to her tense emotions. He watched her for a while with a deep gaze. Seeing that she was still coldly avoiding his gaze, he couldn't help but chuckle. Hearing the man's chuckle, Jean Wan abruptly raised her eyes to glare at him. "What are you laughing at? You didn't sleep this late and ran here barefoot. You're worried about me, en?" Jean Wan's expression turned colder. "Don't think too highly of yourself. I just happened to overhear their conversation and knew that they were up to no good. This is the Mo family home. If something filthy and disgusting really happened, Grandfather Mo will most likely be so angry that his illness will act up tomorrow. I can only blame myself for being stupid to care about such things." "Really?" The man still chuckled. Jean Wan didn't want to disturb him, but when she saw the small silver bag in Mo Pylan's hand, she felt that she had gone too far, so she rushed up to her. Now she regretted it very much, but even if she said those words, she was afraid that it would only make things worse. She was very vexed. She regretted that she had been so impulsive just now. After 3 years, had she forgotten what kind of person Mo Jingshan was? How could he be so easily tricked by her? However, what Uncle O told her kept reminding her of the scene where Elder Mo broke his crutch on his back, which made her unable to lie down and rest peacefully. In short, she was really impulsive tonight. Jean Wan was depressed. The servant came quickly. In less than 3 or 4 minutes, the spare first aid kit of the Mo family was sent over. Mo Jingshan opened the door to pick up the first aid kit. Every time Jean Wan was about to get out of bed, the man would throw 2 threatening words at her. "Don't move." At this moment, he was taking medicine from the first aid kit. His eyes were calm and steady, and his expression was calm and indifferent, making it difficult to see through him. When he brought the medicine over, when Jean Wan looked at him with a guarded face, he motioned for her to raise her chin. Jean Wan looked at the closed door and hesitated before slowly raising her head. As soon as the disinfectant was rubbed on her neck, she trembled in pain but didn't make a sound. She even turned her face away and closed her eyes to avoid looking at the man who was applying medicine for her. Mo Jingshan glanced at her forbearing expression and didn't speak. His movements became lighter. When he applied medicine on her neck, he found that the wound might not be caused by fingernails. Thinking of the diamond rings that Mo Pylan liked to wear on her hand, he knew the cause of the wound. "If you hadn't hurt yourself, I might have appreciated your bravery tonight. Unfortunately, you are still brave and can't even protect yourself," the man commented sarcastically. Jean Wan, she was still upset that she shouldn't have come here tonight. At this moment, she was angry, but she didn't show it. Hearing this, she was about to push him away and stand up, when the man suddenly touched her ear. The vague pain and inexplicable sensitivity made her give a short, low cry. Just now, when Mo Pylan pulled her hair, her nails had touched her ear. Although it didn't hurt, it must have been broken. "What's your name?" The man helped her apply medicine on the broken skin on her ear and said lightly in an emotionless tone, "When I opened the door for Mo Joshua, I smelled the smell you applied on her body. If you dare to call me that again, I'll see if I can bear it." Jean Wan. Chapter 506. The moment she fell on the bed, Jean Wan rushed to sit up. Mo Jingshan didn't do anything to her. He just put away the medicine in his hand. His shirt was still neatly on, indicating that he hadn't showered or slept so early. His temperament was cold and handsome, but she couldn't sense any lust from him. She had always known this man's calmness and self-control. Mo Shaoza had once used this method to make things happen between him and Nshuyan. At that time, he didn't seem to be shaken by lust, so the fragrance shouldn't be a problem. Putting the medicine box aside, Mo Jingshan seemed to finally find the time to look down at the woman sitting by the bed. As soon as their eyes met, Jin Wan's nerves tightened, but she still stood up. It's just a small wound. There's no need to do this. The medicine has been applied. I'm going back. He glanced at her barefoot on the ground, and his handsome face was unruffled. He said mildly, "Put on your shoes. The shoes are outside." Mo Jingshan signaled her to go to the temporary shoe rack in the room with his eyes. Jin Wan hesitated and walked over. She opened the door on the inside of the shoe rack and suddenly saw the pink slippers that she had only worn 2 or 3 times when she came to the Mo family. She paused. Looking at the pair of shoes inside, it seemed that nothing had changed in the past 3 years. She opened her mouth. Mo Jingshan, I really want to know. Back then, you didn't want me anymore. Did you regret it later? She didn't know when, but the man had come behind her. He unhurriedly took out the pair of pink slippers and handed them to her. What do you think? Hearing these words, Jin Wan took the shoes and said mildly, maybe not, because I've never seen the word regret on you. The man glanced at the shoes on her feet. Put them on. It's getting late. Go to sleep. His voice was gentle, as if the two of them were just chatting about a common, everyday topic. Jin Wan composed herself and turned to look at him. When grandfather Mo beat you, why did you? There's still some drug in my body. Are you sure you can withstand my loss of control? Continue to stand here, but I can't guarantee how long I can endure it. The man interrupted her. His tone remained the same, but his voice was deep and hoarse. Jin Wan's voice faltered. She abruptly opened the door and quickly walked out, not staying a moment longer. As the night grew darker, Jin Wan tossed and turned, unable to fall asleep. When she finally fell asleep, she suddenly received a call before 4 in the morning. When she saw that the caller ID was Yen Ji's number, she frowned. Why was this brat calling at this time? Jin Wan picked up the phone and put it to her ear, still lying on the bed, and answered the phone with her eyes closed. What? Calling me at this hour? Are you sleepwalking? Sister Wan, I'm sorry to wake you up so late, but our SWAT team suddenly has an urgent mission and has recalled all our members. The Mo family is too far from the city, and we can't hail a taxi at this hour, so we might have to drive your car back. Yen Ji's voice was unusually stern. It sounded like he really had an urgent mission. Yen Gu did not have as much freedom as Feng Ling. After all, he belonged to the SWAT team. Even though he was by her side as a bodyguard, he still had to listen to his superior's orders. If there was any major case or mission that required manpower, he had to rush back at any time. All right, then come to the villa I live in. I'll open the window and throw the car key down for you. All right. Sorry to trouble you, Sister Wan. Jin Wan sat up and took out the car key from her bag. After waiting for a while, Yen Gu was already waiting downstairs. She pushed open the window and glanced at him. Usually, Yen Gu would laugh and laugh like a sunny boy by her side. She did not expect that when there was a mission in the team, his expression would be so stern. Jin Wan threw the key down. He raised his hand to express his gratitude. Jin Wan only waved her hand to ask him to hurry up and then turned back to bed to continue sleeping. It was not until 7:00 the next morning when Jin Wan woke up that she suddenly remembered that the car had been driven away by Yen Gu. How was she going to return? As expected, Jin Wan had to rush back to MN Group for work. Mo Jingshan was also preparing to return to the company because Elder Mo had been recovering well for the past 2 days. With Elder Mo around, Jin Wan had no choice but to take Mo Jingshan's car. The black ghost drove out of the Mo family home. Elder Mo kept smiling and waving from behind, telling Jin Wan to come back often to visit him. It was not until the car window was closed that Jin Wan restrained the smile on her face. She stared at the front of the car and did not look at the man who was driving. The atmosphere in the car was very quiet. However, during breakfast, Jean Wan could tell that the drug in Mo Jingshan's body was already gone. Right now, in the car, she could clearly feel the man's clear and faint scent. The car had just driven into High City's downtown area when they suddenly heard the sound of several police cars clamoring. Many of the surrounding cars were forced to stop, and many of the cars parked by the side of the road had been knocked askew. There seemed to be the smell of exhaust smoke in the air, as well as some kind of gunpowder smoke. When the car drove into this area, it saw the scattered police cars and armed police officers in the surroundings. Mo Jingshan slowed down the car and looked in that direction. It appeared that a fierce police chase had just happened here. There were several pools of blood on the ground. Jean Wan also saw it. If it were in the past, seeing the blood on the ground and the armed police officers would definitely shock her. However, after experiencing life and death in Cambodia, she was no longer surprised by such things. She was only puzzled. Strictly speaking, last night, the SWAT team was on an urgent mission. Could it be this? Mo Jingshan had already driven the car to the nearest police car. The police stationed here would ask every passing car to stop and search. When he rolled down the car window, the police took a look at them and then at the situation in the car. As usual, he recorded the license plate number of the security car on the booklet in his hand and said, "If you want to go downtown, you'd better take a detour. The police are chasing a group of armed kidnappers. To ensure the safety of the nearby citizens, the roads ahead have been sealed off. Can't we directly go to the West City district from here?" Jean Wan asked. Chapter 507. Usually, such shootings were more common overseas. Within the country, there were not many cases of armed kidnappers. With such a sudden occurrence, it was no wonder the entire SWAT team had been mobilized. Even Yan Gu had been summoned back. Seeing so many police cars and destroyed cars around them, it was likely that there had been an intense car chase before they arrived. Many car glass shards were scattered on the ground, as well as the bloodstains on the ground. All of this indicated the kidnappers' ruthlessness and speed when they fled without a care for anything. "Thanks." Jean Wan nodded at the police officer. The officer raised his hand and waved it forward, indicating that the car could be let through. She turned to look at Mo Jingshan. "It seems like I'll have to trouble CEO Mo to take a detour around the city to send me. This originally 1-hour trip will probably take a long time." Mo Jingshan did not respond. A moment later, he only said, "Fasten your seatbelt." Jean Wan lowered her head to check her seatbelt. "It's fastened." The man glanced at the surrounding police cars and debris on the ground. With a roar, the black ghost sped toward the city's highway. It was already morning, and the sky was bright. There were 2 entrances to the highway nearby, and several police cars were stationed around them. It seemed like the entire city was under martial law. She wondered what the situation in the city was like right now. Both sides of the highway were lush green fields in summer. Jean Wan had lived in High City for a long time, but she rarely passed by this highway. In order to try her best to ignore the man driving, she picked up her cell phone and took a few photos of the fields. The air conditioner in the car was moderately warm, but outside the car, it was scorching hot at -35 degrees. Every few kilometers, she could see police cars by the roadside. However, she did not see which car Yan Gu was in. She guessed that he was somewhere else. Finally, when they were about to exit the highway, a slightly worn-out van suddenly appeared from another intersection. Jean Wan glanced at the front through the rearview mirror, only to see that the van was suddenly speeding in their direction. In fact, it was even charging in the opposite direction. When she saw that there seemed to be a black muzzle pointing at their car window, her expression froze. She immediately tightened her grip on her phone. No wonder the police officers standing outside the police cars on the ring highway were so tense. It turned out that this group of people had already escaped from the west side of the city. God knows how many cars they had changed. This van was definitely a cover for them to hijack halfway through their journey. Jean Wan stared at the black muzzle and suddenly had a question in her mind. Mo Jingshan's car had been driven in the country. Were the windows bulletproof? If they really opened fire, would the bullets be able to penetrate? But he also felt that his idea was ridiculous. Bulletproof glass was not something that could be used casually. It might be common abroad, but it was not necessarily the case in China. For the sake of fire safety and other aspects of safety, some domestic vehicle control centers generally did not allow bulletproof glass to be used casually. Sit properly. All of a sudden, the man's calm and cold voice entered her ears. Jean Wan subconsciously steadied her body. Sit properly. The moment she finished speaking, she suddenly felt the van and the car collide with each other at an extremely fast speed. At the same time, the car brushed against the gun raised against the window. The ear-piercing sound of the car door rubbing against each other caused all the hair on one's body to stand on end. However, in this kind of hair-raising moment, Jean Wan was not the slightest bit afraid. The sun was glaring on the horizon. The man's expression was as usual. In the face of life and death, in the face of danger, or in the face of any unstoppable force, his gaze remained cold and heavy. He did not say a single word. When the rear window of the van was also opened and a gun was aimed at their car, there was a peng sound. At the same time, the car Jean Wan was sitting in also quickly avoided the bullet attack. The van seemed to have set its sights on them. Hearing the sound of the police car chasing from behind, the van sped up on the highway, heading straight for them. However, just as Mo Jingshan finally drove the car to another highway exit, the van that had been rushing toward them quickly caught up. The two men leaned half of their bodies out of the car window, raised their guns, and fired 2 shots at their car tires. The moment the 2 gunshots rang out, Jean Wan instantly felt the car falling down. The tires had burst. The moment the tire burst, the car, which had been driving steadily, tilted to the other side of the road due to its center of gravity. Thankfully, Mo Jingshan's driving skills were adept, and he easily stabilized the car. However, after the tire burst, the car's speed decreased significantly. The minivan that was originally close to them immediately rushed over and blocked in front of their car. This was a downhill road off the highway. In front of them was the van, and behind them was a slope. It was not a problem for the car to continue driving forward, but because the rear tires had burst, they could not move back. Seeing the 2 men in black in the van coming toward their car with guns, Jean Wan's heart finally jumped up. Their guns have been modified. They can easily shoot through ordinary car windows. Mo Jingshan looked at the 2 men who came over with guns and surrounded them, speaking unhurriedly. Jean Wan asked in surprise, "Then can we still rush out now?" Mo Jingshan glanced at the crowded vegetable market in front of the van. People living near the Ring Highway like to buy things in this kind of outdoor vegetable market. The sky was clear and there were many people. If they rushed out now, there would be dozens or even hundreds of casualties, including many children who came out with their families. Lie down. Don't make a sound. Mo Jingshan unfastened Jean Wan's seatbelt and warned her with a heavy voice. As soon as he finished speaking, Jean Wan's head was suddenly pressed down by him. He didn't withdraw his hand until he could no longer point the gun at her from the angle of the car window. Jean Wan knew that there were countless innocent passers-by in front of them and police cars approaching from behind. The 2 of them were unarmed except for this car. The only thing they could do was to stall for time and protect themselves. She obediently hid under the car door and did not speak, but her eyes were on Mo Jingshan. Chapter 508. Mo Jingshan had completely predicted their plan. There was no need for the car to be locked. The kidnapper outside had already fired 2 shots at the center of the car's lock. Even if it was locked, it would still be opened. Hearing the gunshots from the door, Jean Wan subconsciously stood up. The car door that normal bullets would not be able to penetrate was already smoking. At this moment, Mo Jingshan glanced at her, using his eyes to warn her not to move. They had guns, but she and he did not. In such a situation, they could either stall for time or be killed on the spot. Just as Jin Wan was wondering what Imo Jingshan was planning, she heard him say in a low and cold voice, "These two people's arms and legs are injured. They won't be able to drive for long. They need someone to drive and help them escape. This is a chance. Listen to me and don't move." Before Jin Wan could react, the front and back car doors were abruptly opened. One of the kidnappers jumped into the car, raising his gun and pressing it against Imo Jingshan's head. The other kidnapper also pointed his gun at him. "If you want to live, drive the car and find a way out." As expected, it was exactly as Imo Jingshan had said. The moment she saw the cold muzzle of the gun pointed at Imo Jingshan's head, the same fear she felt 3 years ago in Cambodia surged into her heart. Jin Wan raised her hand to cover her mouth, trying her best not to make a sound. However, the car was only so big. She was a living person squatting in the front passenger seat. Naturally, they would see her immediately. The two kidnappers coldly glanced at her and continued to press the gun harshly against Imo Jingshan's head. Imo Jingshan's features were cold and indifferent. Without any other expression, he raised his hands to indicate his agreement. The two kidnappers saw that he did not resist and thought that he was afraid. As the sirens of the police cars approached, they exchanged glances and jumped into the car, closing the doors. One of them continued to point the gun at the back of Imo Jingshan's head, while the other pointed the gun at Jin Wan. Jin Wan stared at the gun. She turned to see Imo Jingshan mouthing 3 words to her, "Don't move." The kidnappers had been chased by the entire city police force for who knew how long. They were injured and reeked of blood. They could kill the two of them at any time in a fit of anger and then drive away. Even if they couldn't drive far due to their injuries, it was still better than leaving their fate in the hands of a stranger. Right now, Imo Jingshan was gambling. He was gambling on their trust. He was gambling on their unfamiliarity with high cities' terrain. They had to find someone to drive them away. Jin Wan also knew that these kidnappers were not joking around. She only stared at the black muzzle that was pointed at her. She heard them urging them to drive faster and saw them pull the trigger. If they continued to delay, before the police arrived, the two of them would definitely be shot to death. Mo expressionlessly started the engine and drove. The two kidnappers said from behind, "The speed of this car is very fast." Fortunately, only the 2 tires at the back burst. It should only affect the speed a little. If we keep driving fast, we should be able to shake off the police cars behind us. As he spoke, the kidnapper who had the gun pressed against Imo Jingshan's head suddenly said coldly, "Hurry up and drive. Don't dilly-dally." At the same time, he pressed the barrel of the gun harshly against Imo Jingshan's shoulder as a threat. Such a familiar scene caused Jin Wan's hands and feet to turn cold. She abruptly raised her eyes to say, "Don't you have to use your arms and shoulders to control the steering wheel while driving? If you press down on him like this, how is he going to drive?" The two men immediately focused their attention on Jin Wan, who appeared to be completely powerless. "Yo, this little girl is quite hot." Imo Jingshan did not even furrow his brows when the gun was pressed against him. However, because Jin Wan had attracted their attention, his gaze turned cold. He immediately gave her a warning look. "Hurry up and drive." The kidnappers heard the sound of a police car approaching. They felt that although the car's speed was fast, it deliberately avoided the vegetable market after exiting the highway. Instead, it turned into a small road by the side. This small road was not smooth and was filled with potholes. The bumpy road caused them to be extremely frustrated. "If the police car really catches up to us, I'll first kill your woman with a gun before killing you." The gun once again landed on his shoulder. This time, it was smashed down. After the car gradually stabilized, Imo Jingshan said hoarsely, "Drive past a road and let her off. I'll bring you guys away." Jin Wan abruptly turned to look at him. There was a short moment of silence in the car. However, the two kidnappers did not hesitate over whether they should let her go. Instead, one of them suddenly said, "Should we kill him first? I think this woman should know how to drive." Let her drive? They saw that although the man driving was skilled, it was clear that he was just stalling for time. If this person was not honest, they might really be captured by the police. The cold barrel of the gun was pressed against Jingxin's head. The kidnappers were about to move when Jin Wan suddenly shouted, "I don't know how to drive. Even if you kill him, I won't drive." The kidnapper's movements paused. He immediately stared at her suspiciously. Jin Wan found a sharp spot under the front passenger seat and slashed it harshly twice. She then raised her hand that was covered in red marks and was even leaking blood to show them. She then raised the wound on her neck to show them. "This is my car. The person driving is the chauffeur I hired. I went out to participate in an outdoor activity and accidentally suffered some external injuries. I was just about to ask the chauffeur to send me to the hospital to bandage them up. If I knew how to drive, why would I need to hire a chauffeur?" The kidnapper coldly laughed. He suddenly pressed the barrel of the gun against her head. "Chauffeur? Whose chauffeur is dressed so luxuriously? Are you trying to trick a 3-year-old? No matter what, I'm a famous businessman in Haicheng. My chauffeur follows me to all sorts of places. Of course, I have to dress more decently. From top to bottom, I can't even see the brand of his clothes. Haven't you heard of high-quality imitations? With just a few hundred yuan, he can buy a shirt and trousers that look exactly the same as the original. I even gave him this pair of leather shoes when I was in a good mood. What's wrong with that?" The kidnapper coldly laughed. At the same time as he pulled the trigger, he felt the atmosphere and temperature in the car suddenly plummet. The kidnapper turned to look at the expressionless man who was calmly driving the car. "Chauffeur? Your chauffeur's adaptability is really extraordinary. He even knows how to avoid our car. Earlier, when he bumped into our car on the highway, I don't think he's an ordinary chauffeur." As he spoke, the gun that was originally aimed at Jin Wan suddenly turned toward Jingxin. The two of them seemed to really want to kill Jingxin and leave her, a woman, to drive. Chapter 509. As the car shook violently, the two kidnappers who were already injured fell to the side with their guns raised. One of the kidnappers whose arm was heavily injured also dropped his gun by the side. The sirens of the police cars grew closer. The other kidnapper had also fallen to the other side due to the abnormally violent shaking of the car. Before he could return to his senses, he was sprawled against the back of the seat. The gun in his hand was swiftly pressed against Jingxin's head, and he scolded with a fierce expression, "Damn, this car sure has some skill. If you want to live, shake off the police car for me. Otherwise, this old man will shoot you right now." Seeing that the other gun was still on the ground, Jin Wan's hand slowly moved on the seat. She removed her high heels and ignored the warning gaze Jingxin was giving her. She abruptly stood up and rushed up. As she stood up, she viciously slammed the sharp heel against the kidnapper's arm and the high heel in her other hand viciously slammed against his face. Jin Wan's eyes were filled with shock. Jingxin's gaze turned cold. The moment the other kidnapper stood up and was about to move against Jin Wan, he made a quick turn, causing the kidnapper's body to tilt uncontrollably to the right. Jin Wan quickly reached out to pick up the gun on the ground. However, the moment she raised her head, the kidnapper whom she had just injured in the face and arm had already pressed the gun against her head. The cold barrel of the gun was pressed against her head. He narrowed his eyes at Jingxin, who was in the driver's seat. "Don't move. If you dare move, I'll kill her immediately. Drive the car onto the main road for me. Don't waste time on the small road." Jin Wan's arm was harshly held by the kidnapper, and the gun was pressed against her forehead. This modified gun was not much weaker than the long guns she had encountered in Cambodia. In fact, it was even faster. With just a slight movement of his finger, a bloody hole would instantly appear on her head. The gun in her hand had yet to be grasped tightly when it was snatched away by the other kidnapper. At the same time, she felt a sharp pain on the back of her neck. The other party had used the butt of the gun to slam it against her head. The pain caused her to stumble and fall into the back seat. As Mo Jingshan's cold gaze swept over from the rearview mirror, the kidnappers continued to press their guns against Jin Wan. They clearly realized that pointing their guns at this woman was more effective than pointing at him. At the very least, the speed of the car had increased. Jin Wan was just about to struggle when the kidnapper used the butt of the gun to smash down harshly on the back of her neck, causing her to feel nauseous and her vision to blur. Just like that, she was pressed firmly against the car seat. Her hands were locked behind her back, and she barely managed to turn her head around. However, the kidnapper held her hostage and ordered Mo Jingshan to drive the car onto a clear road. The sirens of the police cars kept approaching. The domestic armed police force was not a joke. The reason why these two kidnappers wanted to hijack their car was that they fancied the performance of this ghost was too good. Its speed was also not a luxury car that ordinary cars could catch up with. If they hadn't driven the van to crash head-on just now, they probably wouldn't have been able to catch up with it. Drive faster. Hurry up. Damn it, if you can't increase the distance between us and the police car in 30 seconds, the two of you can forget about living. The gun in the kidnapper's hand pressed down once more. With a click, it was pressed against Jin Wan's ear. Jin Wan was pressed tightly against the seat, and her entire body was tense. She endured the pain to say, "You guys shot the rear tires. How fast can this car go?" "Shut up." The kidnapper grabbed her hair harshly. Jin Wan's upper body was pressed against the seat, and her legs were almost kneeling. The two kidnappers did not sit down. One of them helped to press her down while paying attention to the police car behind them. There was not the slightest hint of relaxation on his face. He raised his leg and directly stepped on Jin Wan's back, using this opportunity to maintain his balance in the car. The kidnapper suddenly said, "The driver, open the rear window." In the next second, the car window was opened. The kidnapper, whose face was covered in blood from Jin Wan's heel earlier, turned around and raised his gun toward the police car, chasing them relentlessly. With a pang sound, he fired a shot. The bullet didn't hit the tire of the police car, but at least it could be seen that the police knew that they had hijacked the car and knew that there were people in the car that they had hijacked, so they couldn't shoot them. He immediately sneered and said, "Drive to the road with fewer cars, and drive as fast as you can." Ever since Jin Wan was pressed against the back seat by the two of them, Mo Jingshan's gaze was cold. He did not speak, nor did he quickly turn the car around. He was afraid that the two of them would attack her again in a fit of anger. In a situation where they did not have any weapons, they were all made of flesh and blood. At this moment, anyone under the muzzle of a gun was akin to meat on a chopping board. The man did not bat an eyelid as he increased the speed of the car. The distance between them and the police car grew. Jin Wan was pressed down hard, and her back was stepped on harshly by the kidnapper. Both her hands were locked behind her. She lay there with some difficulty, breathing. However, her gaze occasionally shifted toward Mo Jingshan's seemingly calm back as he drove. After not seeing him for 3 years, she discovered that this man's ability to remain unfazed in the face of danger had always been extraordinary. In fact, it was even better than 3 years ago. However, when the kidnappers heard that there were police surrounding them, they anxiously and angrily kicked Jin Wan's back twice. Jin Wan instantly felt her chest tremble violently, and the taste of blood almost rose from her throat. She resisted the pain and did not make a sound. From the corner of her eyes, she saw that the man's fingers were gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles had turned pale. Jin Wan's lips suddenly curved, releasing a low, hoarse laugh. After ruthlessly shattering all of her happiness, would she still care about the slightest bit of heartache and warmth? She admitted that when she suddenly got up and rushed over just now, she just didn't want them to shoot him. In this situation, it was difficult to protect herself. She knew that if she hadn't been in this car just now, it would have been easy for Mo Jingshan to escape, but she was in this car, and she was his burden, so she almost rushed up with the intention of risking her life. No matter what, at least for the sake of the Mo Jingshan who had always protected her behind, at least for the sake of the Mo Jingshan who had held her to avoid bullets in Cambodia, she would do this without hesitation. 3 years ago, the person who died was not only Mo Jingshan, but also herself. A person lived for a lifetime. Furthermore, she had one more life. If she wanted to die, she would die. If she wanted to live, she would live. Why did she have to endure it so miserably? However, this man still threw away his armor to protect her. Chapter 5:10. Through the rearview mirror, their gazes met. Jean Wan smiled at him, and a single tear fell from the corner of her eye, flowing down the side of her nose. The smile on her lips did not change. Mo Jingshan watched her, and his gaze deepened inch by inch. At this moment, the kidnapper noticed that their eyes met. He thought that the two of them had a tacit understanding to resist and immediately smashed the butt of the gun against Jean Wan's head. As she groaned in pain, he abruptly tugged at her hair and gave her a harsh slap, scolding, "Turn your head away." Jean Wan's face was filled with rage. The kidnapper's face was filled with rage as he cursed, "Turn your head away." Jean Wan's head was instantly pressed to the side. Her body was almost twisted from the pressure, and she gritted her teeth in pain. Her body trembled. Mo Jingshan watched as blood slowly flowed from Jean Wan's head to the back of her neck, dyeing her clothes red. At this moment, his gaze turned even colder. He drove the car to 180 kilometers per hour, speeding toward the deserted Binhai Road. The kidnapper's face was injured by Jean Wan earlier, and half of his face was covered in blood. When he saw that the woman was struggling to resist, he immediately revealed a bloodthirsty smile. "Little girl, he's not a driver at all. The two of you are a couple, aren't you?" Jean Wan's head was pressed against the back of the seat. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, hoarsely saying, "No." "Still so stubborn? Earlier on, in order to save this man, you didn't even care about your own life. It's clear that you want to fight us to the death. However, if you want to fight us to the death with those thin arms and legs of yours, this old man won't even need a gun. I can press you down with my bare hands." As he spoke, the kidnapper fiercely tugged at her hair again. Seeing that half of Jean Wan's face was swollen from the earlier blow, he directly pressed the muzzle of the gun against her face. His gaze was roguish and filled with viciousness as he said, "Tell me, when I open fire, should I first shoot through your head? Or should I just shoot you in the face with your delicate skin and tender flesh? Shoot on both sides of your face, leaving a bloody hole on each side. It must look good, right?" There was a faint scent of blood in the car. He wasn't sure if it was the kidnapper's blood or the blood from Jean Wan's head that had been smashed by the gun butt. Jean Wan closed her eyes and said calmly and depressingly, "Didn't I drive you to escape?" The car kept speeding up. "Why are you in such a rush to kill me? If you really kill me, I'm afraid that both of you will die today." The kidnapper, however, laughed loudly. He tugged at her hair and forced her head to tilt back. "Baby, such a fierce character doesn't match your enchanting and sexy little figure at all. If you had begged for mercy, perhaps we could have given you a quick death on account of your soft and tender skin. One shot and it'll be over. You won't even feel any pain before you go straight to hell. What a pity, your character makes this old man want to bully you for a while longer." As he spoke, the kidnapper purposely moved his hand down her hair. When he touched Jean Wan's waist, he narrowed his eyes and moved the gun that was originally pressed against her face down, pressing against her chest. He touched her waist with one hand and used the gun to draw circles on her chest with the other. Sensing that she was trembling from anger, he smiled and said, "If it wasn't for the fact that we're in a rush to escape, this old man would definitely press you down in this car and teach you a good lesson." The meaning behind his words was extremely clear. At this moment, Mo Jingshan continued to increase the speed of the car while speaking in a heavy tone, "If you want to escape, don't touch her. The kidnapper coldly laughed as he pressed Jean Wan down firmly. The gun was once again pressed against her temple, and he unhurriedly stepped on her back. He laughed and whistled, turning to look at Mo Jingshan. "All right, if you drive the car above 220, I won't touch her. If you're any slower, I'll rip apart her clothes. Give her a good kiss. Even if you end up dying with us, this old man can be considered to have died under a peony flower. Even if I die, I'll die happily." The car indeed increased in speed. The man driving was unusually calm. However, right now, their lives were in his hands. They were only threatening each other. They had guns, while he had a car. They could kill, and he could bring them away. Jean Wan knew that at a time like this, her half-baked skills were completely useless. She heard the kidnapper's proud whistle and felt the two kidnappers' gazes moving down her back bit by bit, as though they were sizing up her figure. Their gazes paused on her waist, and they used their hands to touch it with ill intentions. In an instant, goosebumps rose all over her body. All of a sudden, Mo Jingshan drove the car onto a large road. The two kidnappers noticed that the speed of the car had indeed reached 220 kilometers per hour, or even faster. They glanced back at the police cars that were almost out of sight, and then at the sea not far from the car window. They narrowed their eyes and asked, "Where is this?" "Binhai Road." Mo Jingshan's tone was mild. Hearing the words Binhai Road, Jean Wan directly laid there unmoving, no longer resisting. A familiar scene flashed past her eyes. She remembered this place. Such a wide road, it's obvious that it's newly built. The surroundings aren't bad either. Why isn't there a single car? The kidnappers suspected that there was a trap. They pointed their guns at Jean Wan as they asked sternly. This road was completed several years ago. However, because there are a few sections between this road and the expressway that haven't been demolished, it's impassable. From here to the city, we have to take a detour of 10 kilometers before we can enter. Gradually, no one is willing to take a detour on this road. Mo Jingshan's voice was calm, but there was a hint of coldness in it. Listening to his patient explanation, it was likely that he had no choice but to be so obedient because his woman was being held hostage by them. The two kidnappers immediately smiled proudly. When they looked back, they could no longer see the police cars. For a moment, they forgot about the important word detour that Mo Jingshan had mentioned. They did not expect that there would be an even closer entrance on this road to intercept them. However, they still pressed down harshly on Jean Wan. They were certain that as long as this woman was in their hands, this man would be obedient until they sent them to a safe place. The morning sun hung from the east. Under the piercing light, the straight Binhai Road quietly extended into the distance. The quiet sea had only light waves crashing against it. In this tranquility, a black ghost sped forward at an astonishing speed. Seeing that Jean Wan was quietly lying there, the two kidnappers thought that she had fainted. They lowered their heads to examine her. Seeing that her eyes were closed and unmoving, they directly reached out and slapped her head harshly. Jean Wan's eyes remained closed and unmoving. "Fainted?" the kidnappers muttered. Could it be an act? She was awake earlier. Chapter 5:11. The kidnapper instantly tore off the clothes on her shoulders. The thin summer dress produced a crisp tearing sound. In an instant, Jean Wan's entire back was exposed, leaving only the pathetically thin buttons of her underwear sticking to her back. Jean Wan remained motionless. "You've really fainted?" The kidnapper stared at the tender skin hidden under her clothes and was about to reach out with his blood-stained hand to touch it. At this moment, the black ghost took advantage of the moment when the two of them were distracted by the police cars and abruptly charged toward the safety barrier by the roadside. The moment the car broke through the safety barrier, Jean Wan, who had not moved for a long time, suddenly opened her eyes. Before the two kidnappers could react, she raised her hand and viciously grabbed the hair of the two kidnappers, slamming their heads together harshly. "Ah! Motherf***ker, Mo Jingshan saw Jin Wan's coordinated movement and suppressed his anger. The moment the two kidnappers raised their guns and were about to point at Jin Wan, he directly drove the car toward the sea. In that moment of life and death, the car had already entered the water. The sudden weightlessness and shaking caused the hands of the two kidnappers to tremble. Mo Jingshan's eyes and hands were sharp. Taking advantage of the moment the two of them released their restraints on Jin Wan, he turned around and slammed his hand against the back of one of the kidnappers' neck. His elbow slammed heavily against the other's face. The moment the other person stumbled, he snatched the gun from his hand. Seeing that the situation was not right, the other person rushed to grab Jin Wan. Without hesitation, he shot him in the shoulder. His long arm reached out and pulled Jin Wan, who was blocked by the two kidnappers, over. Jin Wan no longer had any strength left. Earlier, she had been accumulating strength for a long time. She and Mo Jingshan had similar experiences. Once, they had driven a car into the sea on this road to escape danger. When she heard that this was the coastal road, she immediately understood Mo Jingshan's intentions for driving here. Either they would be successfully intercepted by the police cars, or they would drive into the sea. The safety barrier here could be broken, and they could successfully drive the car into the sea. As long as they entered the sea, the two of them would definitely reveal their flaws in their frantic attempts to escape. If they were not good at swimming, it would be even easier to shake them off. The moment the man wrapped his arm around her waist and brought her back into his embrace, Jin Wan's hair was still stained with blood. Her vision flickered as she watched the two kidnappers struggle over to fight. At this moment, Mo Jingshan had already created enough opportunities. His movements and awareness did not falter in the slightest. As he placed Jin Wan on the passenger seat, he raised the gun with his other hand and fired several shots at the two men's wrists and shoulders. As the two men fell back against the seat, covered in blood from the fear of his accurate marksmanship, Mo Jingshan picked up the other gun and fired 2 shots at the same time, hitting the two kidnappers' legs and knees. Jin Wan sat weakly on the front passenger seat. She could only hear the gunshots. She opened her eyes slightly to see the cold killing intent in Mo Jingshan's eyes. She glanced to the side and saw that although the two kidnappers were not fatally wounded, their limbs had been crippled and they were convulsing in pain as they lay on the back of the car. Blood dyed half the car, and the blood flowed freely. The moment the car entered the sea, because the lock on the car door was broken, the seal was destroyed. Water quickly entered the car. Thankfully, the windows were open, and Mo Jingshan managed to open the car door in time. The two kidnappers were covered in blood as they sat there paralyzed. They could only watch as the car quickly filled with water and sank into the sea. The two of them widened their eyes in fright. Their eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Mo Jingshan carried Jin Wan, who was sitting on the passenger seat and had no strength left, out of the car. Jin Wan knew how to swim, but at this moment, she did not have the ability to swim up on her own. Her entire body was held firmly in the man's embrace. The sea appeared calm, but traces of blood floated out of the car. The car sank quickly in the sea. This time, the two of them escaped from the sea very quickly. Mo Jingshan swiftly carried the weak Jin Wan out of the sea. Earlier, Jin Wan did not manage to hold her breath and choked on the water. She coughed violently and leaned weakly against his embrace. She wanted to speak but could not speak. She raised her eyes to see that the police cars had surrounded them. The two kidnappers would definitely be fished out. Whether they lived or died was no longer their concern. All of Mo Jingshan's methods of dealing with the kidnappers and the places he had shot were all within the scope of legal self-defense. Before they were carried out of the sea, Mo Jingshan removed his jacket and covered her body with it. Without a word, he brought her out of the sea and carried her ashore. The sirens of police cars lingered around, and several SWAT officers came over to ask if they were all right. At this time, Yengu also rushed over from another car. When he saw Jin Wan in Mo Jingshan's arms, covered in blood and seawater, he asked in disbelief, "Sister Wan? Why is it you guys?" Mo Jingshan ignored the other police officers. He only glanced at Yan Gu as he rushed over. At the same time, he caught a glimpse of the car that Yan Gu had been driving ever since they left the Mo home last night. It was Jin Wan's car that was parked among the countless police cars. Car keys. He raised his hand, expressionlessly speaking to Yan Gu. Yan Gu was startled. Logically speaking, in such a situation, he should have immediately brought them to the police car to give their statements. After all, they had just been kidnapped. However, when he saw that Jin Wan seemed to be injured, he subconsciously pulled out the car keys. After receiving the keys, Mo Jingshan directly carried Jin Wan over. He opened the car door and placed her in the front passenger seat. Under the astonished gaze of the police officers, he expressionlessly sat in the driver's seat. Jin Wan's entire body was covered in blood. It was as though she was in pain everywhere. She sat in the front passenger seat and did not speak. She only glanced at the calm sea not far away. Almost as soon as he closed the door, Mo Jingshan abruptly stepped on the accelerator. The small white car that she usually drove at a slow speed was like an arrow released from a bow. Carrying the man's exceptionally cold gaze and Jin Wan's pain and complicated emotions, it turned back to the seaside road and drove into the distance. Mo Jingshan expressionlessly gripped the steering wheel. He did not say a single word, nor did he look at her. He only stepped heavily on the accelerator, and the frantic sound of the accelerator was as though he was shouting himself hoarse. The scenery outside the window could barely be seen clearly. It flashed past her eyes. Jin Wan did not ask him to slow down. She was also almost speechless. It was as though the moment she opened her mouth, the stench of blood would rush out from her chest. The car drove all the way, and in less than 5 minutes, they arrived at the nearest hotel invested by Shine Group. The two of them didn't say a word all the way until Mo Jingshan stopped the car, got out of the car, and pulled Jin Wan out of the passenger seat with an ugly look. He dragged her down without the slightest bit of gentleness. Chapter 5:12. Mo Jingshan walked in and instructed the hotel staff to immediately call the doctor over. He then heavily dragged her into the elevator and pushed her against the glass wall. The moment the elevator doors closed, he pressed her down tightly. Between gritted teeth, he asked her, "Jin Wan, did I tell you not to move?" His voice was as cold as a blade. It was no longer as calm and composed as before. It was clear that he had already lost control. Jin Wan's back slammed against the glass wall of the elevator painfully. Her wrist was also instantly gripped in pain. She stood in her spot and did not speak. Yes, he had said it before. Tell her not to move. Afterward, he mouthed a warning to her not to move. It was not the first time he had said this, but she still moved. Because in that instant, the two kidnappers had already fired at him. They wanted to kill him. She did not want this man anymore, but that did not mean that she had never loved this man. She could not watch him die. She did not want to see his wounded back and neck suffer any more harm. That was why she had rushed up, seeking an opportunity to snatch the gun away. That's right, her skills were very poor. She was not strong, and she did not have the confidence. However, she had still been rash. Her rash actions had caused him more trouble. Originally, Mo Jingshan had planned to cooperate with the police to stop them at an intersection on High Road. In the end, because of her, he had driven the car into the ocean. She had been injured and angered the kidnappers. She had almost died in their hands. Mo Jingshan's anger had already burned away his rationality. Her silence could not extinguish his anger and instead added fuel to it. He pressed down hard on her shoulders. When the elevator stopped, he pulled her to the door, opened it, and pushed her in. Jin Wan's steps were unsteady as he pushed her into the bathroom. The shower head was aimed at her head. He turned on the switch, and cold water suddenly sprayed out, splashing all over her body. Jin Wan did not resist. She waited until the water in the shower gradually heated up and reached a suitable temperature, warming up her body that had been chilled by the seawater. As her body gradually regained its warmth, the scent of the two kidnappers on her body was also washed away. The blood on her head and body was also washed away. However, her heart suddenly felt a wave of boiling heat. The man stood under the water with her, his soaked shirt wrapped around him. He grabbed her chin cruelly and forced her to look at him. "I've been planning for 3 years just to change the course of your life. I wanted you to live well, not to send you to your death." The man in front of her panted heavily, and every word he said pounded on her heart. Jean Wan instantly stared at him in a daze. It was as though something that had been puzzling her for a long time was finally reconnected. She stared at the man in front of her in a daze. The water in the shower kept pouring down. She stared at the man with her wet eyes and felt that all the blood in her body had frozen. Su Jilan died in exactly the same way as she did in her previous life. After Ji Mengran went missing, she was homeless and even sold by human traffickers. She almost lost her life. In her previous life, everything that had happened to her was related to the two of them, but all the paths she had taken and all the obstacles in her life seemed to have been forcibly transferred to them, the starting point of her life, divorce, and return to the position she belonged to. A new life, a new life? Was that what he meant? Was that it? The man held her chin. "I should have stopped you from coming back. I should have used the most vicious and unpleasant words in the world to attack you. Even if I hurt your heart to pieces, as long as you give up, as long as you obediently live a happy life with a new person, as long as you don't appear in front of me again." Mo Jingshan's eyes were almost dyed red from the fear and anger that he had almost personally watched her send herself to her death. Jean Wan had seen him lose control before. But she had never seen him lose control like this. Hadn't he always been very calm? Damn that calmness. He stared at her and asked, "I'm willing to bear all the separation, even if you hate me for the rest of your life, as long as you learn how to live a better life. As long as it's for your own good, I'm willing to do anything." "But why did you come back?" The sprinkler gradually turned on, and more water poured down. For a moment, Jean Wan couldn't see his face clearly through the curtain of water. She could only stand under the water as if she had been petrified, letting the warm water wash away all the coldness from head to toe. Mo Jingshan was full of anger, but he had nowhere to vent it. Seeing her standing motionless under the water with a blank look on her face, his reason was finally completely annihilated. He picked her up and pressed her against the cold wall behind the curtain of water. "You'll never learn to be obedient, will you? You don't know how to cherish your life, do you? What on earth do you want from me? Jean Wan, what else do you want from me?" He gritted his teeth. His breath was very heavy, brushing against her face. His eyes were bloodshot, and his whole body was trembling. He had never been so embarrassed before. Even when he was in Cambodia, even when he was covered in blood and almost killed in that car accident, he had never been so embarrassed. He peeled away all the forbearance and suffering word by word, as if he was peeling away the cruel shell layer by layer. But she was right. The past was the past. Things were different now. She didn't even want to know the reason why he forced her to divorce and cruelly and heartlessly pushed her away. So what if he knew? He was prepared to be alone for the rest of his life. He just wanted to watch her live well from a distance. He wanted to see her learn to grow up, become strong, and gradually become indestructible. He wanted to see her not die one day at the age of 30, nor would she suddenly disappear one day because of the change in her life. He just wanted her to live a safe and stable life. But she insisted on appearing in front of him again and again, making him unable to bear it and making him lose control several times. He wanted to approach her but didn't know how to pull back the woman he had hurt with his own hands. He wanted to recover this lost land of hers, but he knew that she had been hurt so badly that she had almost forgotten her feelings. For the first time in Mo Jingshan's life, he didn't know what to do with her. He was helpless. The sound of water from the shower continued to ring in his ears. Jean Wan stared at him with her black and white eyes. She opened her mouth but couldn't say a word. She suddenly smiled, and the smile on her lips grew wider. She seemed calm, but her eyes were fixed on him. She did not shout herself hoarse, nor did she show any anger, fear, or doubt. She only stared at him with a pair of red eyes, and her face was covered with droplets of water. It was hard to tell whether she was crying or laughing. Mo Jingshan felt as if he had been hit in the head with a stick. At this moment, a string in his brain seemed to have completely broken. It was as if all reason had been burned away. The man's eyes were bloodshot. He suddenly lowered his head and kissed her hard. Chapter 5:13. This kiss was too wanton and entangled. Mo Jingshan seemed to have been tied down by reason and responsibility for many years. After she returned to High City, thousands of strings were cut off by her one by one. Now, it was finally the last string. The man had nowhere to vent his anger. The fear of almost watching her die sublimated in the entangled kiss. He had never tasted this kind of feeling in his life. It was so difficult to take back everything that he had pushed away with his own hands after all the dust had settled. He didn't even know where to start. At this moment, his emotions were completely out of control. He cast aside everything in the past and no longer had any worries. Love was love. He had to take back what he had lost. The unreserved passionate kiss hit her lips and all her senses. Jean Wan was firmly imprisoned against the wall by him. The sound of water was in her ears. She didn't know whether her face was tears or water. She could barely breathe, and all the pain in her body was numb. All her senses had stopped, and she could only feel the man holding her tightly against the wall. In the past 3 years, Mo Jingshan had lived like an ascetic monk. He had planned for her to live a life that had been ruined by others. Finally, with his help, he had succeeded. He had completely let go and allowed her to grow on her own. He did not visit her, nor did he care about her. He had restrained himself and disciplined himself. In the end, this woman's return had broken his vows. He was like a child who was experiencing feelings for the first time. He carefully approached her and was pushed away. He approached her again and was pushed away again. His rationality was still there, telling him that this woman would never be able to return to his arms again, telling him that he should let go, but his body was still not under his control. He controlled himself not to approach but saw her shining in the seaside resort. He saw her frown and smile at others but coldly keep her distance from him, the person who used to be closest to her. He didn't want to agree to the government's stadium reconstruction project. However, when he saw MN Group's name, he signed the agreement on the document that he should have refused. He was talking to a business partner in a cafe when he saw another man's mother holding her hand and smiling at her as though she was looking at her daughter-in-law. He saw her wearing a jade bracelet on her white wrist. After dinner that night, he somehow drove to her place. Before the power went out, he went upstairs only to see that she hadn't returned home yet. When he looked down, he saw that the man had stolen a kiss on her face with the help of the light from the phone in the car. When he saw her stunned expression as she sat stiffly in the passenger seat, it was very vivid. All his self-control was almost ignited in an instant. He lost control more than once. Every time he lost control hidden under the calm surface, he gradually lost control. The woman he treasured the most became the woman he couldn't touch. This was the lips he had longed for a long time but could only taste several times under the pretext of being drunk. Her soft lips were like his heart when he loved her. It was impossible to make up for the 3 years she had missed in one kiss. Jean Wan's shoulder-length hair was scattered over her shoulders, and a few strands were wrapped around her neck like seaweed. Her breathing was erratic, and she struggled to breathe in his arms. The man's kiss was almost ferocious. In the bathroom, he pressed her against the wall and tore off the last piece of clothing on her body. When the water was steaming, the endless desire seemed to be ready to explode. Everything could no longer be hidden, and everything did not want to stop. Just when Mo Jingshan couldn't bear it any longer and was about to have sex with her, the woman in his arms suddenly softened. He paused, and when he saw her close her eyes and almost fall down, he took a step back and stretched out his arm, and she fell forward weakly in his arms. She was injured. Under the cover of the water and long hair, the bleeding wound on her head could barely be seen. However, her body couldn't bear it and she fainted. Mo Jingshan's expression was cold as he carried her up and walked out of the bathroom. Jin Wan's body was soaked in water and blood. The hotel staff had already called the doctor under his orders, and the doctor was knocking on the door cautiously. The doctor's treatment of the wound was very painful. The butt of the handgun was not that sharp. Her head had only been smashed, and it was like a knock. There was still some blood. Furthermore, when Jin Wan was brought out of the sea, she didn't have much strength and couldn't even hold her breath in the water. As a result, she choked on the seawater and felt uncomfortable in her throat and lungs. Jin Wan quietly lay on the bed, allowing the doctor to treat the wound on her head. When she turned over, someone placed an ice pack on the swollen side of her face, causing her to furrow her brows in pain. She frowned in her sleep. "Brother Mo, I'm sorry." Even when everything was over, Jin Wan's dreams were still of the salty and cold seawater. She saw Mo Jingshan pushing her out of the deep sea with a cold expression again and again. She saw the moment she was finally pushed out of the sea, Mo Jingshan smiled and sank back into the sea. "No, don't," Jin Wan struggled in her dreams and charged back into the sea. She swam wildly in the endless sea but couldn't reach him no matter how hard she tried. She swam toward him with all her might, only to see a pitch-black hole in the depths of the sea. Mo Jingshan stared at her as though she was a stranger, and then he was instantly sucked into the black hole. She quickly swam over. The moment she entered the black hole, the world seemed to have been restored to its brightness. She saw herself dying in the prison. The moment she fell unconscious, a figure suddenly rushed in. She finally saw him clearly. That person was Mo Jingshan. It was actually Mo Jingshan, who had suddenly returned from America after not seeing him for 10 years. He carried her body that still had a trace of warmth. Ignoring the group of prison guards who were obedient to him, he carried her out expressionlessly. Jin Wan watched this scene in a daze. She wanted to follow him out but was blocked by an invisible barrier. She could only see the man's figure gradually moving further and further away. The light changed in an instant, and it suddenly turned into a quiet ward. In the ward, she lay silently on the white bed. Mo Jingshan stood by the bedside, silently watching her body that had already cooled to the point of not having any warmth at all. Jin Wan couldn't walk over and could only watch the man standing by the bed from afar. His gaze was so gentle that it reminded her of the 10 months of Mo Jingshan. He looked at the 10 years that belonged to her, and his gaze was clear and cold. Chapter 5:14. Car accident? How many months did he wake up? Jin Wan stared in disbelief at the silent, cold man standing by the bed until she saw the man's fingers gently stroke her eyebrows and eyes as if he were really the 10-month-old Mo Jingshan standing by the bed. She could no longer hear what Ji Mengran said. Jin Wan looked at Mo Jingshan's face, which gradually became blurry. She couldn't see anything clearly, but the car accident Ji Mengran said happened 10 years later in Los Angeles and he slept for several months. It happened so much earlier in this life. Mo Jingshan, who had promised to leave her world, suddenly returned to High City from America and rushed to the prison as soon as he came back. It was as though he wanted to stop her death. It was as though he already knew everything, but in the end, he could not stop her from taking her last breath. He kept his promise. He didn't come back for 10 years, but he didn't marry for 10 years. After waking up from the car accident, he suddenly rushed back to High City. Could it be that the car accident gave him the memory of what she experienced 10 years ago after she was reborn? So when Mo Jingshan woke up from the same experience, he also remembered everything? It was just that it happened many years earlier. So, he really knew everything. Her experience, her death, the long 10 years that they didn't meet because of her stubbornness and his promise, he knew everything. There was only white light in front of her. She couldn't see Mo Jingshan, couldn't see her cold body on the bed, and could only walk forward aimlessly. It was as though Mo Jingshan's voice was speaking by her ear. He lay down by her side, holding her ice-cold hand with his. Gently, she could not tell what he was saying by her ear. She wanted to come closer but couldn't. She wanted to speak, but she felt an invisible whirlpool sucking her away. Then there were countless strange dreams, so bizarre that she couldn't connect them. Sometimes she was in the past life, sometimes she was in the present. The scene of her dying in prison was suddenly overlapped with the scene of Su Jilan falling in prison. The scene of her homeless standing on the street with a blank face was overlapped with Ji Mingran's figure, until they were completely covered. It seemed that all the ruined traces of her life that had been caused by people had been replaced by these initiators. Jin Wan slept for a day and a night in confusion. When it was time to eat and apply medicine, the man would dig her out from under the blanket, feed her and apply medicine. She was half awake and could not distinguish reality from her dream. She only felt that the man was disturbing her dream when he woke her up to feed her. In the beginning, she would frown and throw a tantrum, refusing to eat. She wanted to continue sleeping, but it was useless after a few times. When she refused to eat, the man was even more stubborn than her. If she only cared about sleeping and refused to eat, she would be the one suffering if she did not cooperate. Therefore, when Jin Wan was dug up in a half-awake state, she had no choice but to eat obediently and let the man apply medicine or ice packs to her face. The next day, Jin Wan finally woke up, but when she opened her eyes and looked at the familiar and strange environment, she was stunned for a long time, wondering if she was still dreaming. This place, Aolan International? Coincidentally, when she woke up, a doctor came to check on her body. Jin Wan weakly closed her eyes and allowed the doctor to examine her. When the doctor left, she lay on the bed, staring blankly at the man who had just sent the doctor away and returned to the bedroom. The moment she met Mo Jingshan's gaze, Jin Wan finally woke up from her dream. Everything that had happened before she fainted rushed back to her mind. She originally did not speak, but Mo Jingshan spoke up. "You're awake? You slept for almost 2 days. You didn't even eat properly when you were half awake. Come and eat first." Jin Wan did not have time to ask, wasn't she brought to a hotel near Binhai Road by him? Why was she at Aolan International when she woke up? The man directly walked out of the bedroom, leaving her with a view of his back in a white shirt. Jin Wan, she did not move from the bed. After waiting for a while, the man returned. However, Mo Jingshan actually said that she was not allowed to eat in the bedroom. He said that aside from the injury on her head, her other injuries were not serious. After sleeping for 2 days, her strength was severely lacking and she had to wake up to eat. Furthermore, she had to go to the restaurant to eat. Jin Wan remained unmoving. "My head hurts. I don't have any strength." The man glanced at her, walked over, and directly lifted the quilt. "I'll carry you over." Jin Wan's face was indeed slightly pale. The moment the quilt was lifted, she abruptly lowered her head to look at the man's shirt she was wearing. She had been washed clean, and her body still smelled faintly of shower gel. Her hair was also fresh and clean. Aside from the shirt that belonged to him, she did not even have any underwear. So, while she was unconscious, he not only brought her back to Aolan International, but also bathed and changed her clothes for her. Jin Wan did not move. "I'm not feeling well. I haven't woken up yet. I want to lie down for a while more, and..." She was not wearing any other clothes. Regardless of whether those dreams were real or not, the two of them were already divorced. It was really inappropriate for her to wear so little in front of him. The woman lying on the bed stared at him with her clear black and white eyes. She insisted on lying on the bed and did not move. She even had the intention of pulling the quilt back over her body. The moment she pulled the quilt back over her body, the man silently lifted the quilt and threw it aside. He scooped the person on the bed into his arms and carried her out. "Sleep after eating. I've only fed you some porridge these days. You have to eat. The moment Jean Wan was carried, her body stiffened, but she really did not have any strength to resist. She could only widen her eyes and say, "Mo Jingshan, don't you have any clothes here that I can wear myself?" The man said indifferently, "Before you returned the key to AO Lan International to me 3 years ago, didn't you take away all of your things in advance?" Jean Wan. So this is really AO Lan International? Why did you bring me here? The man was unperturbed. The hotel is not suitable for recuperation. Jean Wan rolled her eyes at him. The hotel was not suitable for recuperation? Then why didn't he say that it was not suitable for her to be violated when she was injured? If she hadn't fainted in time, he would have turned into a beast in the bathroom. But fortunately, her injury was not serious. She was hit by the butt of the gun. She should be thankful that she did not lose her memory or become a fool. Jean Wan couldn't help but touch her hair, wondering if the doctor would shave off a piece of her hair to make it easier for her to apply medicine. She was worried, but when she touched her hair, she was relieved to find that not a single strand of hair was missing. Chapter 5:15. When she was carried to the dining table, Jean Wan looked at the food on the table, which was obviously just ordered from a restaurant. "Jean Wan, am I not a patient? How can I eat such oily food?" The man put her on the dining chair. "They're all vegetarian dishes. They're not so oily." Jean Wan didn't speak anymore but reached out and tugged the hem of her shirt down hard, trying to cover as much of her thighs as possible. When the man caught a glimpse of her movement, she still kept a straight face, but after all, she still had a lot of questions in her heart. She picked up the chopsticks and asked, "By the way, did Su Jilan's death really have something to do with you? Eat." Jean Wan, she glanced at him again. She was indeed hungry. No matter what, she had to eat. She was not in a hurry to talk about anything. She lifted her chopsticks and began to eat, but she only ate a little of the dishes. Although these dishes looked good and tasted delicious, perhaps because she had just woken up, she could not eat much. As she ate, she lost interest in these dishes. In addition to these vegetarian dishes, there was also a very light steamed fish. After tasting the fish, she felt that although it tasted good, it was not good enough. She couldn't help saying, "Nowadays, the chefs of the hotels near Aolan International are not very good." For some reason, she felt that the food sitting here shouldn't taste so bad, but she couldn't figure out why she felt this way. Mo Jingshan scooped soup for her. Hearing her words, he looked up at her and said indifferently, "I was busy taking care of you when you were in a coma. Do you expect me to make time to cook for you?" Jean Wan bit the chopsticks and fell silent. Oh, right. Every time she lived in Aolan International, Mo Jingshan would cook for her even if he came back late from working overtime. Every time she came here, she could almost always eat the delicious food he made. In the U Garden, she had Auntie Chen to cook for her. In other places, she might order takeout or cook for herself, but in Aolan International, she often ate his cooking. It turned out that the strange feeling she had just now was just because of this place. The man put the soup in front of her and didn't talk to her anymore. "Eat." Jean Wan looked at the cold and indifferent man opposite her. She recalled those strange and dazzling dreams and slowly pursed her lips. Let's not talk about those dreams for the time being. What he said about returning to the starting point and about life's trajectory could also be put aside for the time being. But for the past 2 days, he hadn't gone to the company and had been taking care of her. She heard that after he took over Shine Group, he almost never took a day off. This man now looked more unreasonable than before, but he was especially patient with her. She lowered her head to eat. Perhaps to show that she was not really unable to eat because of the gap, she simply ate a big bowl in one go. Although she felt much better, she was still badly bullied by the 2 kidnappers and slept for 2 days. It was impossible for her body to recover in a short time. She sat at the dining table without moving, but in her heart, she had already decided to go back to bed and have a good sleep, waiting for her physical and mental state to recover. But it did not seem appropriate for her to continue living in Orange International. After all, they had been divorced for so long. Jean Wan didn't think she was a vengeful person before, but when it came to Mo Jingxian, she found that although she was not obsessed with the past, nor would she tear her heart out and make a scene, she was still very vengeful. My cell phone and everything in my bag should have fallen into the sea with your car. Now I can't contact anyone. You should have a cell phone here. Can you lend it to me to make a call? She asked. The man stared at her for 10 seconds. When Jean Wan was about to explain why she wanted to borrow his cell phone, he said lightly, "Stay here until your wound is completely healed. I'll send someone to inform your company." Jean Wan, she hadn't even said the reason. Mo Jingxian walked up to her and lowered his eyes to look at her still pale face. "Go back to the bedroom to rest. There are no clothes for you here. I'll ask someone to buy them from the mall and buy some daily necessities you can use, okay?" Jean Wan sat at the dining table, pursed her lips, and said after a moment, "You can't have no underwear left here. Let's not talk about buying clothes. Is it appropriate for me to stay here wearing your shirt without any underwear?" Mo Jingxian, why not? Mo Jingxian, why not? Seeing Jean Wan's angry expression, he seemed to be helpless and said in a low voice, "Then I'll go look for it for you. See if you forgot to take one or two with you when you left." Jean Wan, ask Mo Jingxian to help her find her underwear? Not to mention that the two of them no longer had a legal relationship, even before the divorce, he didn't seem to have done this kind of thing. Seeing that she didn't answer, the man turned to the bedroom. Seeing that he was really going to look for it, Jean Wan got up. "I'll find it myself." Mo Jingxian glanced at her, raised his chin, and pointed to the bedroom, saying indifferently, "Go ahead." Why did the topic inexplicably change from borrowing his cell phone to looking for underwear? Jean Wan looked at his handsome features and brows. Her expression was heavy, but she still unwillingly and quickly walked toward the sun. As she walked, she continued to pull down the hem of the shirt, wondering if Mo Jingxian did it on purpose. He clearly had a shirt with a longer hem than this one. She had worn it in the past. He was tall and had long legs. When she wasn't wearing high heels, he was more than a head taller than she was, so his shirts usually covered more than half of her thighs. However, this shirt was clearly not the longest. It barely covered the top of her thighs. She couldn't pull it down even an inch. She pulled the shirt and walked into the bedroom with a dark face. She opened the wardrobe, pulled open the drawer, and rummaged through it. Sure enough, none of her things were left, not even in the corner. 3 years ago, before she returned the key to him, she did come to take everything away. But at that time, she did it very quickly. She couldn't have left nothing behind. But now, it seemed that she was really serious at that time. Indeed, she didn't leave anything behind. The man didn't stop her from rummaging through the drawer. He stood in front of the bedroom door with one hand in his trouser pocket and looked at her indifferently. "I've asked someone to buy it for you. None of your clothes will be missing. 2 hours won't matter. Just put up with it for a while, okay?" Seeing that there was really nothing, Jean Wan pushed the drawer back heavily and reluctantly agreed with an ugly look on her face. But she couldn't keep her legs bare, so she opened the wardrobe and took out a pair of loose, soft trousers from it. Of course, it was Mo Jingxian's. She hid behind the wardrobe door and put on the trousers. When she came out from behind the wardrobe door smugly, she suddenly met Mo Jingxian's eyes and paused. Chapter 5:16. Sure enough, Mo Jingxian's eyes stopped on the trousers she was wearing and then looked her up and down. A moment later, he smiled faintly. Jean Wan closed the wardrobe door speechlessly, feeling that it was not wise to stay in the same room with him. Now she was dressed like this, without a bag, cell phone, or any ID. For some reason, she felt as if she had lost her freedom and became shorter. Even if she wanted to talk to him, she seemed to have lost her courage. She put her hand on the wardrobe door and suddenly asked, "Who did you send to buy clothes for me?" "Shenmu." Won't it be too inconvenient for him to buy things like underwear? The man answered casually, Auntie Chen. Jean Wan calmly made an "oh" sound, turned to sit down on the bed for a rest, and did not continue to ask. She had just taken 2 steps when she suddenly stopped and turned to look at him. Auntie Chen? The man's eyes fell on the trousers she was wearing, looked at the trousers that were too long and stepped on by her feet, and said indifferently, Auntie Chen's youngest son was admitted to High City University. She came from the countryside to accompany him. She lives near the university and has nothing to do, so I asked her to find time to clean every day. After leaving the Yu Garden, Jean Wan thought she would never see Auntie Chen again. But she did not expect that Auntie Chen's current job was still with Mo Jingshan and the Mo family. This was good. First, Auntie Chen's life and salary were guaranteed, and second, Auntie Chen was trustworthy and suitable for long-term employment. She was relieved that Auntie Chen was going to buy clothes for her. She didn't say anything, sat down on the bed, raised her legs, and rolled up the long trousers, saying, I may have to borrow your cell phone. I have so many certificates in my bag that I need to apply for. Many of them are related to the company. I can't be careless. This kind of thing can't be delayed. With that, she raised her eyes and said, and your car, you didn't change it 3 years ago. Now it finally has to be scrapped, right? Hearing the man's calm voice, Jean Wan looked at him, only to see that he did not intend to continue talking about the car and had already handed her a cell phone. Jean Wan glanced at it and stood up to receive the phone. She poked at the numbers of several company employees and Xiao Ba that she could barely remember, saying, I still have to apply for a new SIM card. Auntie Chen has already gone. When she returns with the clothes, she will bring the replacement card over. In an instant, even the last reason to leave here was gone. Jean Wan held the phone in silence for a moment, lowered her head, and continued to dial the number without speaking. When she was on the phone, Mo Jingshan turned and walked out. She sat on the bed and called Xiao Ba, explaining why she had been missing for the past 2 days, and asked them to get the documents and certificates in her bag that had been destroyed by the seawater. After that, she put down the phone and looked at the black cell phone in her hand. Suddenly, he felt that all the things that he had been worried about since he woke up had been explained. His heart also calmed down. She could almost hear the words the man had said to her as he pinched her chin in hatred when he pushed her against the wall of the hotel bathroom. I've been planning for 3 years just to change the course of your life, to let you live well, not to let you die so easily. She lowered her eyes, put down the phone, and then sat on the bed for a while. Finally, she got up and went out. She rolled up the trousers that had grown a lot. Now she didn't have to step on the trouser legs anymore, and it was much easier for her to walk. She walked out of the bedroom in a man's shirt and trousers. She didn't find slippers in the bedroom. When she got out of bed, Mo Jingshan carried her to dinner, so she came out barefoot. After walking out, she was about to ask him when the man's low, indifferent voice rang above her head. Put on your shoes. Jean Wan paused and was about to say that she had taken away all her shoes here 3 years ago. How could there be any shoes for her to wear? The man just pointed to the door with his chin. She followed his finger and saw that he had taken out a pair of new gray men's slippers. They were his, new and unused. She looked at them attentively, walked over to put them on, and came back in the pair of slippers that were much larger than her feet. In recent years, she had been very particular about her appearance because of her work. At this moment, she was wearing a loose shirt, loose trousers, and a pair of men's slippers. She looked unbelievably casual, and because her hair was only shoulder length, she was clean and had no style at all. She looked like a high school student who stole adults' clothes to wear. She looked neither fish nor fowl, but she had a different kind of charm. Seeing her like this, the man smiled faintly. When people were in a familiar environment, they would subconsciously immerse themselves in the memories of this environment and even feel that nothing had changed, but at this moment, seeing Mo Jingshan smile, Jean Wan couldn't calm down even if she wanted to. She turned her head stiffly, but her expression was serious. Mo Jingshan. He sat on the sofa opposite her, picked up the glass kettle on the coffee table, and poured her a glass of warm water. What do you want to say? You'll answer whatever I ask? You won't lie to me? The man put the glass on the side of the coffee table closest to her, glanced at her, and said nothing. She approached him again and stared into his eyes. There are still many things I don't understand. Do I have a second chance at life, but I can't change the course of my life at will? If I don't do something, I'll still die when I'm 30 years old in a few years? He didn't seem to care much about the process she had never understood. He just said casually, now as long as you live a good life, don't risk your life for others, eat regularly, and keep exercising, I promise you'll live a long life. So, Su Zhilan's death and what happened in the 2 years after Ji Mengran's disappearance have something to do with you? The man just glanced at her and waited for her next words. How did you do it? What do you know? Then are you dead? Did you die once just like me? Or did you just wake up with those memories? What else did you know when I didn't know? Chapter 5:17. Jean Wan was puzzled. So divorce is just the way I have to go back to where I started. What about after the divorce? Now Su Zhilan has been punished. She's dead, but I'm alive. Should I continue to not see you for 10 years and have nothing to do with you for the rest of my life? Mo Jingshan was silent for a while. You can choose your own life now. What should be over has been over. You can do whatever you want. After saying that, the man looked at her. It's a good choice to be Mrs. Mo again. Mo Jingshan looked at her. His calm expression perfectly covered up his uneasiness when he said this. He had been prepared to pay the price, but at this moment, it would be difficult for him to take it back. He knew her too well. Looking at his calm expression, Jean Wan remembered the look on his face when he said that he was dead. She said coldly, "Oh, I'm sorry. I thought a lot just now, but I didn't think about it. Since I can choose my own life now, I can let go of everything else, including you, Mo Jingshan, can't I?" It was the expected answer. Mo Jingshan didn't show any disappointment, but his eyes were deep, and the emotions in his eyes fluctuated for a while. How are you going to let me go? No matter what the reason was, it was so cruel for him to break up with her that Jean Wan didn't want to forgive him. Jean Wan was still cold. Fall in love again, marry another man, say goodbye to the past, move to a new starting point, and then move to a new peak. What do you think? The man looked at her for a moment, narrowed his eyes slightly, and chuckled. Marry another man? Jean Wan straightened her back. I've lived 2 lives and been entangled with the same man for 10 years. There's no need for me to be entangled with him anymore. Anyway, I've already left him. A good horse doesn't go back to the grass. I can only thank you for giving me a new life. When I get married again, you can stand with my father. My new husband and I will respect you as our second parent and bow deeply to you. That's how I repay you, isn't it? Mo Jingshan watched her. Right now, your words are filled with daggers. Can your heart feel better? There was no change in his expression, but he could feel the chill in his eyes when he heard her say that she was going to bow to him as if he was her second parent and that she was going to walk to him with her new husband. Jean Wan kept a straight face and turned to the bedroom. My head still hurts. I'm going back to the bedroom to sleep for a while. When Auntie Chen brings me my clothes and my SIM card, please wake me up, CEO Mo. If you can ask Auntie Chen to buy me a new cell phone, I'd be very grateful. After all, you know, people can't do anything without a cell phone. I'm the head of MN Group, and I can't just be a boss who doesn't do anything. After that, he entered the bedroom and closed the door. Mo Jingshan didn't say anything until Jean Wan lay back on the bed. She lowered her head to look at the shirt and the man's trousers, and then at the sunshine outside the window. She frowned gloomily, got up, and drew the curtains. The bedroom was plunged into darkness, and then she lay down again. Jean Wan had thought that she couldn't fall asleep because all kinds of things were entangled in her mind. Maybe this was right. After all, life couldn't be restarted in vain. There were always some trajectories and experiences that couldn't be easily reversed. Then what on earth did he do in the past few years to transfer all the fatal flaws in her to Su Jilan and the others? After she died, in those days that she didn't know, he must have done or known something. She had slept for a day and a night, and in total, she had slept for 2 days. After she woke up, she had been here, eating and dressing. She didn't consume any energy at all, so she couldn't fall asleep. But soon after she closed her eyes and let her imagination run wild, she fell asleep in the faint familiar smell of the bed. When she woke up again, it was dark. It was not noon when she fell asleep. Jean Wan got up from the bed, feeling much recovered. When she walked out of the bedroom, she saw 2 bags of clothes on the sofa and a small paper bag, in which was the replaced SIM card. Where is Auntie Chen? Jean Wan thought she could see Auntie Chen. When Auntie Chen came back at noon, she saw you sleeping soundly, so she didn't disturb you and left. She'll come back tomorrow morning. If you want to see her, see you tomorrow morning. The man came out of the study at this time, his tone indifferent and calm. Jean Wan glanced at him. Forget it. Anyway, she's in High City. If I have a chance, I'll invite her and her little son to dinner near High City University. I'll see her sooner or later. I'll change my clothes and leave. With that, she picked up the clothes on the sofa and the replaced SIM card. When she was about to turn back to the bedroom, she thought for a moment and looked back on the sofa. Don't you have a cell phone? CEO has thrown a car worth tens of millions into the sea. You can't be so stingy as to not ask someone to buy a cell phone for me, can you? He said indifferently, I'll go buy one with you after I've recovered. Jean Wan looked at the man's displeasing composure. It was as though no matter what she said or made a fuss, he would treat it as her throwing a tantrum because of the anger she had suffered in the past. He was patient and calm. She snorted coldly. That won't be necessary. I don't plan to recover here. After changing my clothes, I'll go downstairs and take a taxi. The man's voice was slightly cold. Without a cell phone, you can't contact anyone. Without ID or money, you're going downstairs to take a taxi at such a late hour. Are you waiting for someone to rob you? Jean Wan, he lowered his eyes to look at her and said lightly, if you don't feel comfortable living in Aolan International, I'll send you back. The premise is that your head was smashed and you'll have headaches in the next few days. You can't be alone at home. It's not impossible for me to stay at your place. Jean Wan, then forget it. She lived so peacefully in Yuehu Bay. She couldn't let him know where she lived now. Is it so serious? She raised her hand and touched her head again. In fact, if she didn't touch it, she wouldn't feel any pain. She just felt some pain when she touched the wound with her hand. She had a feeling that Mo Jingshan deliberately said it was serious. If it was really serious, she would have been sent to the hospital. It was impossible for her to just stay here to recover. Jean Wan saw him glance at her swollen face and head and stared at her with his dark eyes. It's very serious. Chapter 518. Jean Wan changed her clothes, came out of the bedroom, and met Mo Jingshan's eyes. Mo Jingshan silently looked at the woman's clear eyes as she stared at him. She was not entangled in the past, angry, or hateful. In fact, he was not sure whether she would forgive him for this reason. Jean Wan saw that his face was indifferent and calm. She didn't speak, straightened her collar expressionlessly, and said, Can I trouble CEO Mo to lend me 100 yuan? She couldn't borrow a cell phone, so she suddenly asked for money, and it was only 100 yuan. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, but Jean Wan had already walked to the temporary hanger in front of the door and rummaged through his clothes inside and out, but didn't find his wallet. Then she remembered that in the sea, not only her bag and the things in her bag were gone, but also the things in his shirt and trousers. It had only been 2 days, and she had been taking care of him at home. She probably hadn't applied for a new ID card, and she probably didn't have time to buy a new wallet. But since he often went back to Aolan International, he had the habit of carrying some paper money with him, so there should be at least 100 yuan here. Thinking of this, Jean turned to look in the other rooms. If she couldn't find the money, she would go to the study. Anyway, she could get the money and take a taxi back to Yuehu Bay. However, as soon as she turned around, she was caught by a strong arm and taken back in an instant. Mo Jingshan pressed her against the hanger, clasped her waist, and forcibly locked her in his arms, his voice low and heavy. "You haven't recovered. Do you have to go?" The sudden intimacy and the man's breath blew over her face. Jean-Wan's heart skipped a beat. She tried to push the man's arm away, but it didn't budge at all. She immediately slapped his arm with a cold face and turned to him, saying angrily, "Mo Jingshan, when I was unconscious, you helped me bathe and change my clothes. I didn't have a choice, so I didn't argue with you. But now I can stand on my own, and I'm not seriously injured. There's no need for me to stay here. Besides, do you have to hold me like this again and again? Let me go." He whispered in her ear. "You know I bathed you. Can you count how many times I've seen you and slept with you? You're so angry just because I hugged you. I've been so careful all these years, but in the end, I've raised an ungrateful wretch? Did this have anything to do with ungrateful wretch?" Jean put on a straight face and couldn't break free from his grip. She could only try to step back, but the clothes rack behind her couldn't support her. She only took one step back and then stopped. She raised her hand and tried to push him away, but she didn't succeed. To prevent her from being hit by the clothes rack when she leaned back, Mo Jingshan put his arm around her waist and held her in his arms. Jean only felt that she was suddenly lifted up, her feet off the ground, and he easily turned around and carried her to the sofa. The man sat down, put her on his thigh, buckled her waist, and moved his handsome face closer. His warm breath almost brushed against her cheek. "I'm afraid it's a little difficult to find a note here." The man's voice was so husky that it seemed he was coaxing her. "Only you can show off in front of me. You've already shown your cold face. You can do whatever you want to take revenge, but you can't leave before you recover. At least, you can't leave until your head doesn't hurt anymore and the doctor confirms that you're fine." How could Jean be obedient just because of a few words from the man? He even said she was cold and pretentious. She was about to argue with him, but when she turned her head, she was kissed by the man who lowered his head. Jean shuddered. It was not the first time that she had been kissed by Mo Jingshan in the past few months after returning to China, but the previous times were either in the dark or when he was drunk, or when she was in a coma and he almost swallowed her alive because he lost control of himself. However, when both of them were sober and everything was peaceful, such a kiss was too intimate for her and even challenged her endurance. After a few seconds, she came back to herself, raised her hand to push the man's chest, and almost reflexively tried to withdraw from his arms. She couldn't push him away and the kiss deepened. The man held the back of her head and turned the kiss into a deep one. Their lips and tongues intertwined, and she couldn't push him away. She only felt the blood all over her body surging wildly, and her scalp was numb. All the familiar and strange passions surrounded her. After pushing for a long time and almost exhausting most of her strength, she could only limp in his arms with difficulty breathing. Her fingers trembled, and she clung to the man's clothes. Jean consciousness was almost muddled. The man held her face with one hand, his warm fingertips stroking the skin of her cheek, and his other hand moved down from the back of her head. When she felt the man's hand under her clothes, she finally shivered, and the chaos in her mind dissipated. She sobered up and pushed him hard. Mo Jingshan didn't intend to let go, but when they were immersed in each other's embrace, he was no longer restrained and guarded against her. This time, Mo Jingshan was really pushed away by her, but only by the distance of letting go. Jean gasped and was about to jump away from his lap. Her pale face was a little red, perhaps because of the kiss just now. This man either stood still and watched her every move calmly without any preparation to attack, or once he was ready to attack, was he ready to take the enemy's head? She angrily tugged down the corner of her clothes that had just been lifted. She took a step back from his lap and almost fell back on the coffee table. Her legs were soft from the kiss, and she struggled to stand up. She was so angry that she said incoherently, "You only kiss and hug me here. How can I continue to live here? If I stay here to recuperate, I don't know how much you will take advantage of me. You can kiss me, but why did you put your hand under my clothes? If I really gave you a good look, would you still?" Realizing what she had said in anger, Jean Wan's face was even redder, and her eyes were full of anger. Her hair was a little messy on her shoulders, and she looked angry and displeased. When he kissed her just now, her breath was uneven, and her cheeks were red. The man looked at her. He didn't intend to do anything to her, but seeing her angry look, his blood surged, and his eyes darkened. Chapter 5:19. Jean Wan was about to say something angrily when she saw that the man's eyes seemed to be burning with a fire that was even stronger than hers. Like a prairie fire, it almost swallowed her reflection in his eyes. She immediately swallowed back the words that were about to come out of her mouth. Mo Jingshan's eyes, they were deep and dark. When he stared at her, it was as though she was naked. The fire in his eyes was so intense that it could almost burn her to ashes in an instant. Jean Wan's heart instinctively trembled. This man was no longer the man she had flirted with and pounced on when she had just been reborn. He completely knew everything about her. He was the Mo Jingshan she was familiar with and extremely intimate with, but also the Mo Jingshan who had promised her that he would never appear again. He was calmer and sharper than the Mo Jingshan she was familiar with. He was familiar but also a little frightening. Jean Wan's heart beat violently under his gaze. For some reason, she felt as though everything about her could be easily peeled away by him. This sense of danger made her heart palpitate and panic. By the sofa, in front of him, she subconsciously wanted to run away. Mo Jingshan stretched out his arms and pressed her body, which was blocked by the coffee table, into the soft sofa. He bent down and kissed her again. It was no longer the lingering and hot kiss that seemed to melt the tip of the iceberg in her heart. Instead, it was an extremely entangled tongue kiss. When Jean Wan panted and tried hard to push him away, he kissed her from her chin and cheeks to the back of her ear. He kissed her sensitive ear, which he was familiar with, and his warm breath landed on her ear. The man's hoarse voice was pressed against her ear. He held her waist through her clothes and said softly, "I can't really give you a chance to find a new husband to be an eyesore in front of me. Being overly calm is useless to you. I might as well be more shameless. What's the big deal about putting my hand under your clothes? Which part of your body haven't I touched?" The sensitive part of Jean Wan's ear was constantly touched. She couldn't help curling up under him. Her body was tense, and she put her hand between their bodies, but he still moved it to the other side of her body. After more than 3 years, Mo Jingshan clearly knew the most sensitive parts of her body very well. The first was behind her ear. She hadn't been intimate with any man for a long time. In the past 3 years, except for being accidentally kissed on the cheek by Mr. Vince, no other man had had any chance to be intimate with her. All sensitive parts were suddenly teased. Her nerves were sensitive and trembled. She couldn't help clutching his clothes and turning her head desperately to avoid him. "Don't." Mo Jingshan raised his eyebrows slightly. He probably knew her better than she knew herself. He knew her sensitive parts, but he didn't expect that she was even more sensitive than 3 years ago. With a touch, her body trembled, and her voice was almost forced to cry. Perhaps because Jean Wan had been giving him a hard look since she woke up, the man seemed to be taking revenge on her. While she was still trying to avoid him, he directly sucked her soft and white ear. In an instant, Jean Wan's nerves were about to explode, and her brain directly crashed. Except for shrinking her neck and instinctively trying to avoid him, her mind was blank and she didn't know what else to do. Her hands also instantly became weak. The man deliberately brushed a warm breath against her ear, and his low, husky voice was still against her ear. Every time I hear you say the word CEOMO with a serious face, the desire lurking in my heart can't wait to press you down on the spot. I want to hear such a sound from your little mouth that is full of cold words. Jean Wan couldn't think calmly. She could only let out a soft moan because of the sensitivity in her ear, but because of the man's words, because of the words that seemed gentle and strong combined with primitive desire, she firmly shut her mouth and refused to make a sound. Try calling me CEOMO again, then. The man's voice was almost bewitching. His low, sexy, husky voice once again fell behind her sensitive ear, but it was almost threatening. Jean Wan bit her lip and didn't speak. She used her strong willpower to resist the man's temptation and instinctively resisted. I have nothing to do with you. If I don't call you CEOMO, what else can I call you? Such soft words with a hint of stubbornness had no effect on the man at all. The burning kiss spread from her white cheek to her neck. He continued to move down without hesitation. Until the man suddenly took a hard kiss on her collarbone, causing Jean Wan to let out a low cry of pain and excitement. Jean Wan suspected that he had left a mark on her collarbone and hurriedly tried to push him away, but she couldn't stop him at all. Just as she froze and didn't dare to wriggle around, the man peeled off most of the clothes he had just put on and kissed her from top to bottom. Jean Wan's body shrank uncontrollably again. She felt that if he continued, she would really completely lose control. Looking down, she saw the obvious and clear red mark on her collarbone. Her face was so red that it could almost drip blood. Angrily, she began to push him with all her might. The woman who had been obedient suddenly struggled desperately. Mo Jingshan thought he was hurting her and instinctively loosened his grip. Jean Wan rolled to the side, but her whole body rolled off the sofa. Her shoulder and head, which had just been injured, hit the sturdy, hard frame under the coffee table. She gasped in pain. Ignoring her disheveled clothes and disheveled appearance, she curled up on the ground, closed her eyes, and covered her head. The pain was so great that tears came out. She rolled down too fast, and the force of the collision was definitely not light. Hearing the woman gasping in pain and sitting on the carpet by the sofa with her head shrunk as if she had been greatly wronged, Mo Jingshan immediately reached out and picked her up from below. Jean Wan was in pain and anger. The moment she was picked up, she hurriedly tried to push him away, but the man still forcibly picked her up and pressed her against the sofa. He raised his hand to pull down her head and checked her head. Where did you hit? Jean Wan had never been a person who liked to cry, but at this moment, her eyes were red from the pain. She glared at him and tried to kick him away with her hands and feet. Don't come over, Mo Jingshan, you gentle scum. You said you would let me recuperate here, but you dared to force yourself on me before I recovered. Sure enough, I was right. You are now a beast in human clothing. Chapter 520. Jean Wan raised her hand to cover her head. And my head. If she didn't show weakness now, this man might really do something to her. It was clear that the arrow was already knocked on the bowstring. The man's gaze was very heavy. Before his desire could dissipate, he was shocked by her pained expression and suppressed everything. When he saw her lowering her head to rub her head, his heart immediately softened. I'm sorry. I've been living like an ascetic for the past few years. It's inevitable that I can't control myself. He raised his hand to rub her head. Is it serious? It's my fault. You stay here and recuperate. I'll try my best to control myself, then. Ascetic? She felt that this was Mo Jingshan's self-inflicted injury to gain the confidence of the beast in human clothing. She didn't speak but lowered her head and let him rub it for her. Seeing that the wound on her head hadn't healed, he didn't plan to do anything to her. He helped her put on her messy clothes. The woman refused to let him touch her, but he didn't stop. His gaze fell on the kiss mark on her collarbone and paused for a moment. Then he looked away with a dark gaze and lifted her collar to cover that mark. All right, you sleep in the bedroom. I'll sleep in the study. I won't touch you, the man said softly after helping her put on her clothes. Her clothes were almost stripped off by him, and her pants were almost taken off. Now he said he wouldn't touch her? Jean Wan raised her head, glanced at him, and raised her hand to push her messy hair back. She said with a stern voice, I want to go home. The man looked at her. After a few seconds, he said, no. She raised her eyelids and stared at him. It's easier to be raped if I stay here, right? Even if I take a taxi back in the middle of the night, it's not as dangerous as staying here. My wife is in my arms. I can't control myself. I'm sorry. Who's your wife? The man lowered his eyes to look at her. The fire that had not dissipated earlier was still in his eyes. If she hadn't suddenly rolled down and fallen on the coffee table, if she hadn't hurt herself, he would have pulled her back to the sofa and continued. He would never let her off. A man who had been abstinent for more than 3 years was undoubtedly terrifying. Jean Wan's fragile little body could not withstand it. The most dangerous person was by her side. How could she live here peacefully while recuperating? What was the difference between having a tiger that had been starving for 3 years and the tiger seriously saying, don't worry, I don't eat meat? Although her head was injured, she wasn't so stupid that she couldn't figure out the situation. Seeing that she remained silent with a cold expression and crossed her hands in front of her chest, Mo Jingshan returned to sit by her side. He brushed aside the slightly messy hair on her forehead, his voice heavy. Does it still hurt? Her voice was patient and gentle. Jean Wan raised her hand and rubbed her shoulder. She then touched the spot on her head where she had been hit. She said in a muffled voice, it's much better. It's just a small bump. It was a little heavy when I rolled off the sofa. I'll be fine after a while. The man leaned over and lifted her arm. Let me see. Jean Wan instinctively moved aside. What are you looking at? Her clothes had just been put on, and he unbuttoned them to look at her shoulder. Jean Wan pressed her hands against the clothes on her body and also the fabric on her shoulders. She glanced out the window. It was the end of August, and autumn was approaching. It was the rainy season, and it was drizzling outside. It was indeed very late. She did not allow him to approach and moved to the side to avoid him. She said seriously and sternly, Mo Jingshan, on account of the fact that you've cared for me for the past 3 years, although I won't go so far as to cut off contact with you and show my gratitude, I'm afraid it's impossible for me to return to being Mrs. Mo. If you stop touching me, I can treat you as my new parent and treat you nicely. But if you ignore my wishes and force yourself on me, don't blame me for turning my back on you. I'll even accept being an ungrateful wretch. Anyway, our relationship has been so bad these years that it can't get any worse. It doesn't matter if the farmer and the snake don't return the favor, don't you think? And, the man casually replied. You know the farmer and the snake. Not bad. Jean Wan, she glared at him for a while and jumped up from the sofa. Seeing that he didn't intend to continue, she stood by the sofa and kept a certain distance from him. She raised her hand and touched her collarbone through her clothes. Thinking of the hickey, she really couldn't put on a good face. Jean Wan turned to walk to the bedroom and looked out of the window at the rainy night, saying, don't forget what you said just now. I'll sleep in the bedroom and you'll sleep in the study. The man didn't respond. His good-looking brows furrowed because of her blatant attempt to distance herself from him. Jean Wan didn't look at him. When she reached the bedroom door, she paused and looked down at the gray men's shoes at her feet. She rolled her eyes, licked her right cheek with the tip of her tongue, and suddenly turned her head to say, I'm hungry. Mo Jingshan sat on the sofa and didn't move. There are ingredients in the kitchen. If you're hungry, you can make it yourself. Jean Wan instantly turned around. Aren't I a patient? Why should I make it myself? Didn't you let me recuperate here so that you can take care of me yourself? Mo Jingshan was indifferent. I won't cook for an ingrate. Take care of it himself? How could he take care of it himself when she kept such a distance from him? Jean Wan, she stared at the man's back for a long time, turned back to the bedroom, and slammed the door with a bang. After returning to the room, Jean Wan turned on the light and looked at her reflection in the window. Although her clothes were put on, they were still a bit messy. Fortunately, Auntie Chen had bought more than one set of clothes for her. There was another set of clothes in the bag on the bed. When she left, she could wear this new set of clothes. Otherwise, she wouldn't be able to see anyone with the messy marks on her body. When she got up in the morning, it was Imo Jingshan who carried her to eat. At noon, she fell asleep and slept until the afternoon. Now she was hungry. After closing the door, there was a faint sound in her stomach. Jean Wan pursed her lips and raised her hand to cover her stomach. After thinking for a while, she went straight to the bathroom in the bedroom. After entering, she unbuttoned her clothes in front of the wide floor-to-ceiling mirror. Sure enough, she saw the kiss mark on her collarbone, which was ambiguous and obvious. Chapter 521. How could there be scars behind her ears? Jean Wan was so angry that she rolled her eyes at the mirror. It seemed that in this hot weather, she couldn't wear clothes with low necklines and suspenders, and she couldn't even tie up her hair. She could only let it down. She slept all day and couldn't fall asleep now. Not long after, Jean Wan smelled a fragrance. She thought it was the smell of a neighbor cooking at this time, but the more she smelled it, the more she felt that the smell seemed to come from the bedroom door. She had just straightened the clothes on her body, smelled the smell, and couldn't help walking over to open the door. The moment she opened the door, she saw that Imo Jingshan had brought out a plate of assorted fried rice and put it on the table. It was so late, and there were not many ingredients. It was still raining outside, so it was not convenient to buy them. Jean Wan thought she would have to starve tonight. However, when she saw the simple but well-prepared bowl of fried rice, she was slightly startled, but still kept a straight face. Who did you make this fried rice for? You know the answer. If you don't eat, I'll throw it out, the man said flatly, but he had already put a pair of chopsticks on the table. What a joke. She was hungry. How could she throw it out? Jean Wan hurriedly stepped on the pair of men's gray slippers that were too big for her, came to the table, picked up the chopsticks, and took a bite. Delicious. Anyway, she was hungry. Everything she ate was delicious. But she forgot how long it had been since she had eaten Boss Mo's cooking. This bite seemed to turn all her unbalanced psychology around. She continued to take a bite, not looking at the man's eyes, but lowered her head to eat without saying a word. Seeing her eating seriously, the man seemed to smile a little, but it was too faint, as if there was no smile at all. Even now, he still felt that Jean Wan's words, "create new parents," were very harsh on his ears. Imo Jingshan went to the kitchen and heated a glass of milk for her. She ate most of it and happened to be a little choked. She took the milk and drank it without saying thank you. The temperature was just right, and it was not hot. She drank most of it. After eating and drinking, Jean Wan was no longer like before, taking the initiative to find something to do after eating the food he cooked, such as putting the dishes and chopsticks in the dishwasher. Now she got up after eating and didn't intend to put the dishes away. The role of the ingrate was vividly portrayed. Imo Jingshan did not say anything, helping her bring the dishes back to the kitchen. Jean Wan wanted to go back to the bedroom, but she had eaten too much and drank a glass of milk, and now her stomach was full. Anyway, Imo Jingshan seemed to have calmed down. In this case, there was no need to deliberately avoid him. She walked around the sofa twice and suddenly glanced at the unopened room near the study. Her eyes stopped on the door and she hesitated for a few seconds. When Imo Jingshan came out, he saw that Jean Wan had been staring at the door. Seeing him come out, Jean Wan pointed to the door. Has this door never been opened? A room that looks like a warehouse with all kinds of books and sundries. Are you curious? The man glanced at the door. Just a pile of sundries? Hai City is the city with the best feng shui in the country. It is surrounded by mountains and rivers. The builder of Aolan International chose this location because a famous feng shui master said that this was the best feng shui in the country, and this room is the center of the feng shui, so it needs a building to support it. But it is not suitable to sleep here, so the other rooms and bedrooms are used normally, but this room is empty, especially this floor, which is located on the top floor of Aolan International. In feng shui, it is sitting on the dragon vein. The origin of Aolan International was actually so particular. Before she spoke, Mo Jingshan's voice said indifferently, Aolan International was bought by grandfather a long time ago. After buying it, he insisted that I should keep it as my wedding house, but I didn't agree. Before you moved in, I only lived here a few times because it was close to the company. There are only some books and sundries in this room, and there is no bed or table. I rarely use it. Jean Wan, from the luxurious decorations in the Yew Garden, I can tell it's all Grandfather Mo's work. It seems that he used to be very fond of helping you study your wedding room. He rushed to buy the top floor of Aolan International for a good omen. Indeed, only Grandfather Mo would do such a thing. The man's expression did not change. He just turned around. Are you full? Jean Wan nodded and was about to return to the bedroom. She thought for a moment. After all, he had cooked for her, so she hesitated and asked, the food just now was delicious. I think I should be grateful to you. Apart from being Mrs. Mo again, is there anything else I can do for you? How can I compensate you? The man smiled. If you pay with your body, I can consider accepting it. Jean Wan, she turned away, but she really couldn't sleep. She went back to the bedroom, but she didn't want to take off her clothes and take a shower. She felt that even if she closed the bedroom door and the bathroom door, it was still not safe to take a shower here. When there was no sound outside, it was already past 10 o'clock at night. Even though the room was air-conditioned, she would still feel uncomfortable if she didn't shower on a summer night. She sat on the bed and pricked up her ears to listen for a while. After confirming that Mo Jingshan was either busy in the study or asleep and had not come out for a long time, she turned to enter the bathroom. Other than the wound on her head, which needed to be covered with a waterproof shower cap, everything else was unaffected. She had deliberately scratched the back of her hand in the car, and it was only a minor scratch. Although it hurt, it was not a big problem for her to take a shower. Finally, she took a shower, dried her hair, and put on her clothes. Jean Wan casually turned up the temperature of the air conditioning in the room, lifted the quilt, and was about to lie down. Suddenly, the bedroom door opened. She paused and turned to see Mo Jingshan opening the door and coming in. She immediately grabbed the quilt, her face guarded. Aren't you sleeping in the study? Why did you suddenly come to the bedroom so late? The man looked at her, his tone indifferent, and he entered the door as if it were a matter of course. The air conditioning in the study is broken. The author's words, at present, there were two sides in the comments section. Side, female lead, fight. Get up. Fight to death. Torture to death. No matter what, she had suffered for so long, the pain of the miscarriage, the violent divorce, and the unprepared abuse, no matter the reason, she can't be so easily forgiven. She won't be happy if she doesn't do it. Side, the male lead has been silently sacrificing. Except for being too calm and ruthless to achieve his goal, he has never done anything wrong to the female lead. He has always been considerate of the female lead. In both lives, he only wants her. Even after the female lead knows the truth, she still gives him a cold shoulder. How unreasonable. Author, you guys continue to quarrel. I'm very stubborn and won't be affected by either side. I cling to the outline and charge forward, trying to survive in the cracks. Chapter 522. Seeing the man coming over, Jean Wan held the quilt tightly in her arms, moved back, and approached the edge of the bed inside. "If you can't sleep in the study, isn't there a sofa in the living room?" The man came to the bedside and said indifferently to Jean Wan, who had a guarded expression, "I've slept on the sofa in the living room for 2 days. The leather sofa is not breathable and uncomfortable." Jean Wan, she pursed her lips and still held the quilt tightly. "Then what are you doing?" "Mo Jingshan, I'm warning you, I'm still a patient." She felt that the divorce could no longer save his abstinence. Maybe she could only show weakness to show that she couldn't bear the torture now. Before she could finish her sentence, the man's arm had already reached over. She was so frightened that she was about to retreat, but she saw the man pick up one of the 2 pillows on the bed, then casually find a set of blankets from the cabinet and directly spread it on the floor. Jean Wan, was he going to sleep on the floor? Without saying a word, the man spread the quilt on the floor, threw the pillow on it, and glanced at Jean Wan, who was sitting upright on the bed with the quilt in her arms and staring at him. "What are you looking at? Do you have a problem with me sleeping here?" Did he want the global CEO of Shine Group to sleep on the floor? Jean Wan thought about it, put down the quilt, and said in a very insincere tone, "How can I do that, CEO Mo? Why don't I sleep on the floor?" After all, he had given her a new lease on life, hadn't he? No matter how vengeful she was, she had to look good on the surface, Jean Wan thought to herself. The man glanced at her darkly because she called him CEO Mo, and Jean Wan subconsciously grabbed the quilt again. Mo Jingshan's voice was cooler than the air conditioner in the bedroom. "It's more realistic for you to invite me to sleep with you. Aren't you a patient? Why are you so talkative? Why don't you sleep? Are you very energetic?" Jean Wan, she got under the quilt, turned over, and slept with her back to the man under the bed. But even if he slept on the floor, they were in the same room. Jean Wan turned over again and looked at the man who was still handsome even though he was lying on the floor. She wanted to say that even if he slept on the floor, he could sleep on the floor of the living room. But when the words came to her mouth, she saw that Mo Jingshan was lying flat on the floor, covered by the air conditioner, and his eyes were closed. She knew that he hadn't fallen asleep yet. After all, he had just laid down. However, when she saw his upright sleeping posture, the words that were on the tip of her tongue turned into soft exhalations in the end. Jean Wan was about to turn over again when the man's indifferent voice came from under the bed. "You've been watching me. Are you secretly observing how I've changed in the past few years?" Ji couldn't help but roll her eyes but did not speak. Mo Jingshan casually lifted a corner of the blanket and patted the spot next to him. "Do you want to come over?" Jean Wan still looked at him silently. The man's indifferent and calm eyes, in this dark and quiet bedroom, were like ink-colored starlight, affecting her ability to control her emotions. During the day, he could do whatever he wanted, but in the middle of the night, he would instinctively think about a lot of things, especially when he couldn't fall asleep. She lifted the quilt and turned over on the bed. When she covered herself with the quilt again, she said flatly, "I just heard that CEO Mo hasn't been sleeping well in recent years, so I wanted to see how a person is like when they're suffering from insomnia. After all, I've never been so calm and crazy as to endure everything alone. All these years, I've been eating well and sleeping well. I basically don't have to think about any memories. At night, I fall asleep as soon as I hit the bed, completely unlike you." The man's brows moved slightly because of her words. He glanced at the woman on the bed with her back to him. Even though she had turned over and covered herself tightly with the quilt, her thin figure still appeared slender and petite under the quilt. From the start, Mo Jingshan knew that she would not easily lower her head. However, he did not expect that her evaluation of him would be that he was so calm that it could drive one crazy. Jean Wan closed her eyes. It was late at night, and she soon fell asleep. The man sleeping on the floor also felt sleepy in this place that had kept him awake for 3 consecutive years. A good night's sleep. The next morning, when Jean Wan woke up, the quilt that Mo Jingshan had put on the bed had been taken away. She sat on the bed in a daze for a while, raised her hand to rub her messy hair, and walked out of the bedroom, only to find that Immerse was not there. She looked at the time. It was already past 9 o'clock in the morning. She had slept for so long yesterday, and she slept for so long this night. The biological clock that she had been used to for years was almost disrupted. This place was so close to his company. He must have returned to the company in the morning. What about her? She was not an idle person. She couldn't stay here all the time. Besides, she didn't even have a phone with her. Jinwan didn't want to waste time here. She even planned to wash up after returning to the company or Yuehu Bay. She went straight to the door and was about to go out. However, as soon as she opened the door, she saw Auntie Chen, who was raising her hand to press the door password. The moment the door opened, Auntie Chen's hand froze in the air and her eyes met Jinwan's. Auntie Chen. Jinwan reacted very quickly. Her sleepy face instantly turned into a pleasant smile. Mrs. Mo. Auntie Chen was so excited that she even forgot to change the way she addressed Jinwan. You're awake. Every time I came here these 2 days, you were sleeping. I didn't want to disturb you, so Mr. Mo asked me to come over in the morning to make breakfast for you. How are you now? Does your head still hurt? Jinwan's eyes paused on the vegetables and fruits in Auntie Chen's hands. Before she spoke, Auntie Chen pushed her back into the door with a smile. Still very excited, she took her hand and said, I heard that you have been in England for the past few years. I thought I would never see you again. I didn't expect to see you again. It's so good to see you again. Auntie Chen, you don't have to make breakfast for me. I can go back to the company to eat. It's late now. I'm going to the company. Jinwan's feelings for Auntie Chen were almost close to family, and the warmth in her heart was real. How can I do that? You are injured, and Mr. Mo has a meeting to attend. He specially asked me to buy some of your favorite dishes to cook for you. Hurry up, sit down, and have a good rest. Auntie Chen pulled Jinwan to sit down on the sofa and then took out some fruits from the shopping bag that Jinwan used to eat. I'll wash some fruits for you. Wait a minute. Jinwan wanted to say that now was a good time for her to slip away while Immerse was away. In broad daylight, even if she had no money or cell phone, she could still go back to her company. Chapter 523. Mrs. Mo, do you still like Chinese food as much as before? How about I make some lean meat porridge? Auntie Chen brought out the washed and cut fruit. When she saw Jinwan looking at her, she paused and said shyly, I'm used to calling you that, so it's not easy for me to call you Miss G. Jinwan smiled, picked up a piece of fruit, put it in her mouth, and took 2 bites. I'll just eat some fruit. You really don't need to make breakfast for me. By the way, Auntie Chen, can you lend me your cell phone? Cell phone? Hearing this, Auntie Chen instinctively took out her cell phone, but when she was about to hand it to Jinwan, she hesitated and suddenly took it back. Seeing the cell phone suddenly being taken away from her fingertips, Jinwan blinked and looked at Auntie Chen innocently. Although I got my card back, my cell phone fell into the sea and is gone now. I can't contact anyone. I want to call the company. Well, my cell phone accidentally fell into the water a few days ago, and it's not working well these days. The signal is not good. Mrs. Mo, if you want to make a call, you'd better wait for Mr. Mo to come back and use his cell phone, Auntie Chen said and put the cell phone back in her pocket with a smile. Jinwan, what on earth did Immerse say to Auntie Chen? She didn't even lend her his cell phone. She could only blame herself for borrowing his cell phone from him yesterday. She didn't expect that she would only have one chance to borrow his cell phone all day. If she had known this, she would have asked Xiao Ba to pick her up yesterday. Now it was too late to regret. Seeing Jinwan lowering her head to eat the fruit gloomily, Auntie Chen smiled and didn't say anything more. She turned into the kitchen to prepare breakfast for her. Lean meat porridge sounded simple, but it was not easy to make. She had to stir-fry the meat, make all kinds of ingredients, and cook the porridge. It would take her at least an hour to make it. While Auntie Chen was busy in the kitchen, Jean Wan once again reached out to her with an innocent and pitiful look, looking for various reasons to borrow her cell phone. Finally, Jean Wan said that she hadn't been back to the company for several days. Mo Jingshan went to the company for a routine morning meeting. He had business to attend to, and so did she. She had a lot of things to do in the company and couldn't be delayed. She begged her to lend her phone for a minute. She only needed to call the people in the company to tell them something. Seeing that Jean Wan was really anxious, he took a look at the time and remembered that Mo Jingshan said he would be back before 10:30. Thinking that Mr. Mo would be back soon, he handed the phone to Jean Wan. Jean Wan quickly called Xiao Ba and told her where she was, the building number, and the elevator password, asking her to come to the rescue as soon as possible. Xiao Ba didn't understand why Jean Wan went to AO Lan International. She only remembered that Jean Wan seemed to live in the Yu Garden and didn't know much about AO Lan International. She thought something had happened, so she told her everything in such a hurry and asked her to take the money and cell phone to find her. After hanging up the phone, Xiao Ba went straight to AO Lan International as requested. 20 minutes later, Xiao Ba arrived, stood outside, and rang the doorbell. Hearing the sound, Auntie Chen hurried out. She was wondering why Mr. Mo didn't come in directly but rang the doorbell, but Jean Wan had already rushed to open the door. As soon as she saw Jean Wan in the door, Xiao Ba asked in surprise, "Boss, what happened? Yesterday you asked me to help you get a new certificate, and today you asked me to come to rescue you with a cell phone and money. Don't you live in Yuehubei? What's wrong with AO Lan International?" Before Xiao Ba finished her words, Auntie Chen felt that something was wrong. She stuck her head out behind Jean Wan and asked, "What's wrong? What's wrong? Who is it?" Jean Wan continued to block her way. She took the newly bought cell phone and a dozen notes from Xiao Ba, quickly stuffed them into her pocket, and said with a smile, "My company's assistant." When Jean Wan finally moved aside, Auntie Chen saw a young girl with a pair of round glasses who looked innocent and lovely, and she nodded. "Ah, your assistant? Do you work in the same way as Assistant Shen?" Auntie Chen nodded. "Yes, similar to Shenmu," Jean Wan explained with a smile. Xiao Ba didn't know what was going on, but she still nodded to Auntie Chen. "Hello. Good, good, good. Have you had breakfast before you came? I just made lean meat porridge. Would you like to come in and have some?" Auntie Chen said and reached out to pull Xiao Ba into the door. Before Xiao Ba realized what was going on, Jean Wan reached out and pulled Auntie Chen's hand back. It could be seen that Auntie Chen didn't know why Xiao Ba came here and was afraid that something would go wrong, so she simply asked Xiao Ba to stay and wait for Mo Jingshan to come back. She never expected that one day Auntie Chen would take Mo Jingshan's side. She even had to guard against Auntie Chen. "I made a lot of porridge. Your little assistant looks very thin and must eat very little. Come in and have some with us." "It's okay, no, I've eaten. I just came to deliver something to CEOG." Xiao Ba hurriedly hid outside. "What did you deliver?" Auntie Chen immediately set her eyes on Jean Wan and Xiao Ba's hands. Xiao Ba reacted quickly this time. Knowing that she had to help Jean Wan cover up the money and cell phone, she suddenly took out her wallet. "I came to deliver a wallet to CEOG. She didn't bring any money with her, so I brought it to her." "Oh, I see." Auntie Chen believed her. She looked back at the time. It was almost 10:30. She took Xiao Ba's hand and chatted for a while before taking her in for breakfast. After a few minutes of pulling and pulling, the elevator door opened. Footsteps could be heard approaching from behind little Mina. Xiao Ba turned her head, looked at the man walking over slowly, and suddenly felt a bolt from the blue in her head. Mo. When Jean Wan saw Mo Jingshan, the fire of hope in her heart was instantly extinguished. Why did he come back so quickly? She hadn't even been able to get out of the room. Noticing the man's gaze, Jin Wan subconsciously looked away, turned around, and stood on the other side of Auntie Chen. Mo Jingshan had come behind Xiao Ba. He must have just come back from the company. He was still wearing a black shirt and trousers, and his suit jacket was casually hung on the crook of his arm, looking noble and cold. In his other hand, he was carrying a pink bag, in which a delicate flat, long box could be vaguely seen. In the corner of the box, she could vaguely see XXX high-end women's lingerie. Was this the lingerie that Boss Missouri personally bought for their boss Nguyen? Xiao Ba's expression froze when she met Mo Jingshan's eyes. So this was CEO Mo's place? Boss had been staying here for the past few days? Chapter 524. Jin Wan closed her eyes angrily. Good my ass. Didn't you see that your boss was almost under house arrest because of this reason? At this time, she still didn't forget to flatter Mo Jingshan and be infatuated with him. Glancing at Xiao Ba's quick action of putting away the wallet, Mo Jingshan smiled indifferently. All right. Xiao Ba's eyes widened. Ah. Boss Missouri spoke to her. And smiled at her. He smiled and said good to her. The first time she spoke to Boss Missouri was in the hotel. At that time, she accidentally ran into him and Jin Wan. When she opened the door, she accidentally ran into CEO Mo taking a bath, but he didn't look so good at that time. Now, he was actually smiling. Seeing Xiao Ba's eyes almost falling into a state of madness, Jin Wan, she realized that it was a big mistake to have an infatuated female assistant by her side. Auntie Chen looked at them. Seeing that Mr. Mo was back, she immediately smiled and turned to continue with her work as if relieved. Jin Wan stood in front of the door, stared at Mo Jingshan's smiling face, and gradually became expressionless with anger. She couldn't even go home if she wanted to. Mo Jingshan glanced at her, turned to walk in, and said indifferently, "Don't you want to come in and have a seat?" Jin Wan looked at his back and then at Xiao Ba. Xiao Ba forcibly suppressed the excitement on her face and hurriedly waved her hand sensibly. No, I didn't know CEOG lived in your place. If I had known this was your place, I would never have come. Jin Wan, well, I still have something to do in the company. Boss, you should try to win over each other. Get married again as soon as possible. I still have the vice president to take care of the company. Sister Xia has finished her confinement and can come to the company to help at any time. You don't have to worry about anything. Focus on your love. With that, Xiao Ba took a deep breath at Mo Jingshan's back with a look of admiration, turned around, and hurried to the elevator, not daring to stay any longer. The corner of Jin Wan's mouth twitched. What the hell was she dating? It was not until the elevator door closed that Jin Wan glared angrily at the man who had walked inside. Mo Jingshan was upright and dignified. Even though the underwear in his hand seemed to be the one he bought for her, he didn't look embarrassed or guilty at all. Jin Wan walked over and glanced at the bag he had placed on the sofa. Sure enough, she didn't see wrongly. It was really underwear. Yesterday, Auntie Chen bought 2 sets of clothes for her, but there was only 1 set of underwear. Under normal habits, she would definitely change today. She didn't expect that he would buy these things for her after coming back from the company meeting. Jin Wan pursed her lips. Why did you come back so early? Are all meetings so short? He said casually, it's a routine morning meeting. It won't be long. Oh, the meeting didn't last long. How disappointing. He didn't even give her a chance to slip away. Jin Wan stared at him for a long while and then slowly took a step back. She tried not to touch the pocket containing her new cell phone and money so as not to attract his attention. She just turned sideways to ask, what happened to the 2 kidnappers that day? 1 dead and 1 injured. It's a gang crime. The other accomplices have been caught. The domestic police are quite efficient in handling this case. No wonder they were so arrogant and so many police officers were dispatched. It turned out that there were more than 2 people. What about your car? Jin Wan had a dark guess that Imo Jingshan had long wanted to change his car. He drove a car worth tens of millions into the sea without even blinking. The man glanced at her and asked indifferently, "What kind of car do you like?" "Does it have anything to do with what kind of car I like? It's not my car that fell into the sea. I don't need to change my car." Jin Wan snorted coldly. The man glanced down at the parking lot from the window. Jin Wan's car was parked below. He smiled faintly. "Why did your assistant come here just now?" Jin Wan stood behind him and said discontentedly, "A certain CEO of Shine Group didn't even give me 100 yuan. I had to find someone to give me the money. But you came back before the wallet fell into my hands." Xiao Ba, that coward, left as he pleased. He came here as if he didn't come at all. There was no difference. He glanced at her. Jin Wan avoided his gaze and turned back to the bedroom on the pretext of going to the bathroom. She took the money and cell phone out of her pocket. Worried that Imo Jingshan would come in and see them, she quietly took these things and the SIM card Auntie Chen had helped her into the bathroom. She sat on the toilet and quietly put the SIM card into the cell phone. After turning on the cell phone and making sure the cell phone was working, she smugly switched the cell phone to silent mode, went out, and hid the cell phone. She would take it out when she needed it. It was not until Auntie Chen said that the porridge was ready and asked her to come out to eat that Jin Wan went out. When Auntie Chen put the porridge on the table for her, Mo Jingshan walked past the dining table, took a look at Jin Wan, who was calm and composed when she came out of the bedroom this time as if she had a backer, and turned his slender and straight figure to the study. Jin Wan ate the porridge, looked up at his back, and her heart was slightly anxious. He wouldn't find out, would he? After entering the study, the man casually turned on the computer under the bookshelf, and the surveillance software in front of the door quickly projected the scene of the past half an hour, including the scene where Xiao Ba stuffed a stack of money and cell phone into Jin Wan's hand and Jin Wan hid them in her pocket. The man's elegant and deep brows moved slightly. He smiled, turned off the screen, and turned to go out. Jin Wan was still sitting at the dining table eating porridge. The cut on her neck caused by Mo Pylon's ring at the Mo family had faded a lot, and the cut on the back of her hand only hurt a little when it came into contact with water. However, when she took a bath yesterday, the wound on the back of her hand that had almost healed began to redden again. She ate indifferently, but the redness on the back of her hand was very obvious. Seeing that she was completely indifferent to her wound, Mo Jingshan watched for a long time before saying lightly, "After eating, I'll apply some medicine on your hand. Don't touch water for a day." Jin Wan looked down at it. It was a cut she deliberately made in the car. She pursed her lips. "No, it's just a little cut. It'll heal by itself." Mo Jingshan took her hand. When Jin Wan was about to withdraw her hand, he held it and looked at the thin cut under the skin, which was still faintly oozing blood. Because she had taken a bath, it was obviously inflamed, so it was red. Jin Wan furrowed her brows and was about to withdraw her hand when she raised her head to see that the man said firmly, "You have to apply medicine." Meeting the man's gaze, Jin Wan quickly looked away, but she could not withdraw her hand no matter how hard she tried. Dash. Chapter 525. Jin Wan wanted to withdraw her hand but couldn't. She had no choice but to nod, and Mo Jingshan let go of her hand. After dinner, the man really insisted on applying the medicine for her. He forced her to sit on the sofa and raised the back of her hand to face him. When he helped her apply the medicine, his movements were very gentle as if he was afraid of hurting her, but it was impossible for the medicine to not hurt her skin. Jin Wan endured it and did not make a sound. She just pursed her lips and looked at the man whose movements were unbelievably gentle. Knowing that she was uncomfortable, Mo Jingshan did not expose her, but his movements were extremely patient. Auntie Chen came out of the kitchen. Seeing this scene, she immediately smiled and quietly returned to the kitchen so as not to disturb them. I can do it myself. After applying the medicine on her right hand, Jinwan reached out to take the medicine in his hand. The man held her down. Don't move. Jinwan looked at him and did not speak, but frowned impatiently. When the man finally let go of her hand, she immediately stepped back to keep a distance from him. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly put the medicine aside and looked at the woman who was still a meter away from him on the short sofa. His handsome brows moved slightly. Don't be in a hurry to make your stand clear. I know how you feel. I'll give you time. It could be seen that Jinwan had let go of what happened 3 years ago, especially when the truth was right in front of her. She had to let go of it. But the ravine he had cut with his own hands was still there. In the past 3 years, she had grown up alone, and there were too many indestructible things in her character. She needed time. Jinwan took a look at him, did not speak, got up, and left. She habitually closed the bedroom door and did not look back. Mo Jingshan got up, walked to the balcony of the living room, picked up his cell phone, and dialed a number. His dark and deep eyes overlooked the view of High City in the distance. The moment the call was connected, he said indifferently, 3 years ago, when I was in a coma because of the car accident, Jinwan was always in the hospital. On the other side of the phone, Enchanting was silent for a moment because of his sudden question. He said, except for being forcibly taken home by your mother, Ms. Wanzhou, for several days, she was almost always in the hospital. What does she do in the hospital every day? Of course, she was waiting for you. At that time, she had just had a miscarriage, and her physical and psychological condition was very poor, but she did not shed a single tear. She was so calm that it was scary. She just stood outside your ward every day. The doctor did not allow her to enter, so she stood outside the door like a fool. She did not make any noise, and when she was tired, she would sit on the chair outside the door for a while. When she saw a doctor coming out of the ward, she would stand up and ask you when you would wake up. Day after day, because they were not sure if you would wake up, even your father and mother had to return to their normal lives. They could no longer stay in the hospital every day, but she just stood outside alone, separated by a door. She could not enter, but she refused to leave. Enchanting sighed as if feeling sorry for Jinwan. You know Jinwan better than anyone else. Before you divorced, you refused any of our advice because you were afraid that you wouldn't be able to make up your mind after hearing this, right? Mo Jingshan's gaze was fixed in a certain direction outside the window. For a long time, he did not speak. Enchanting, what? Jinwan is living a wonderful life now. She doesn't need to rely on you at all. Your woman is completely out of your control. Doesn't it feel good? Mo Jingshan, you're asking me all this now. Do you want to empathize with the pain she went through back then? You were in a coma at that time, and such a great pain forced her to hide all the regrets and sadness of the abortion in her heart, because nothing was more terrible than the news that you would never wake up. No matter what reason you had, the first thing you did when you opened your eyes was to divorce her. You didn't even give her a buffer time. I can't imagine how much she loved you. She even tried to persuade you to stay when you were cold to her. At that time, she would talk to everyone with a smile every day as if you were the greatest motivation for her as long as you were alive, and no difficulties could defeat her. But in the end, she still collapsed, and you were the executioner, weren't you? Seeing Mo Jingshan still didn't speak, Enchanting sneered again. Last time her friend came to the hospital to give birth, we chatted for a while, but she didn't mention a word about you. She wasn't even interested in you at all. In my opinion, it's hard for you to have any contact with her. It's hard for you to even meet her, isn't it? After a moment of silence, Mo Jingshan glanced at the door not far away and said lightly, well, it's hard. Enchanting, what? Are you unhappy? Do you want me to go over and have a few drinks with you? Tell me your coordinates, and I'll cry with you for a while. Mo Jingshan was expressionless. A.O. Lawn International. Chin Sighting sneered. You've been living in that place for 3 years. Your wife, who you lost, should be either in the MN group or talking and laughing with others at a business dinner table. Look at you, now you're like a stone waiting for your wife. Who are you pretending to be? Mo Jingshan didn't care about Chin Sighting's sarcasm. He hung up the phone and turned his eyes to the closed door of the bedroom. Jin Wan had been sleeping a lot these days. It was still noon. She couldn't fall asleep, but she just stayed in the bedroom. He threw his cell phone on the sofa, walked over without any pause, and turned the doorknob without any hesitation. This was his place. Jin Wan knew that it was useless even if she locked the door from the inside, so she didn't bother to do this. Without locking the door opened smoothly. The curtains in the bedroom were closed, and the moment the door opened, light from the living room fell in. Jin Wan, who was sitting on the carpet by the bed in a daze, was startled. She raised her eyes and stared blankly at the man coming toward her. "What are you doing?" she asked subconsciously. Without a word, Mo Jingshan pulled her up from the carpet and put her on the bed. Mo Jingshan. Jin Wan frowned unhappily because he came to hug her again, but the man didn't speak. Jin Wan was angry. Mo Jingshan. I'm giving you time, but it doesn't mean I'm allowing you to sit on the floor and blow on the air conditioner that's only 20 degrees. You haven't recovered yet, and you want to catch a cold again? Jin Wan didn't notice the temperature of the air conditioner. She just felt hot sitting here, so she picked up the air conditioner remote control and pressed it casually. She didn't expect that the temperature would be so low. Chapter 526. Mo Jingshan placed her on the bed and covered her with the quilt. Without a word, he picked up the remote control and adjusted the temperature of the air conditioner to 26 degrees. Then he looked at the woman sitting on the bed. Her fair face was mostly filled with habitual forbearance, and there were no traces of her usual coquettishness in front of him. In the past 3 years, she had grown up as he had hoped. If Jin Wan used to be a hedgehog who was spoiled by his side and was about to have all her thorns pulled out, right now she was a harmless and lazy cat. She looked calm but had incomparably sharp claws. Chin Sighting will come over today. Let him check your head injury. If you don't want to go out, have a good rest in the bedroom. The man sat on the edge of the bed and held her hand. As though inadvertently holding her hand, he placed it on her lower abdomen. This action caused Jin Wan to shiver. She wanted to withdraw her hand but could not. She looked at him and was about to speak when she remembered he had mentioned Chin Sighting earlier and couldn't help asking, "Has Dr. Chin been in High City these years? Is he married to Miss Sher?" The man's hand was still intertwined with hers. No. Jin Wan clearly remembered that Xiao Lui had failed to snatch Sher Nianj away from her. He looked as if he had been seriously injured when he mentioned Sher Nianj. Why hadn't Sher Nianj and Chin Sighting come to an agreement after so many years? Why? Based on Dr. Chin's feelings for Miss Sher, even if he doesn't say it, anyone can see how devoted he is to her. Why hasn't he married Miss Sher yet? Just as she was about to withdraw her hand without batting an eyelid, Mo Jingshan released her fingers one by one. When she shrank back into the bed to guard against him, he curved his lips and raised his brows. You already know that he's very loyal to his lover? It seems like you've been in contact with each other these years? It sounded like the man was somewhat displeased. Although it was not obvious, Jin Wan could feel it. She retracted her hand, which had just regained its freedom, and placed it under the quilt to avoid the man's touch. She curled her lips and said, "Dr. Chin has always taken good care of me since we were in High City. Later, he also took good care of me in Los Angeles. Aren't you good brothers? This so-called brother doesn't want this woman. Since he's not married, it's not too much to help take care of her, right?" The air around the man sitting on the edge of the bed instantly became colder than the air conditioner. He stared at her and seemed to be smiling, but his smile wasn't very happy. You still have such thoughts about him? Jean Wan looked at him. Even though this man was looking at her without saying a word, his gaze was enough to make one feel as though they were sitting on pins and needles. Even though he was silent, he was still filled with an oppressive aura. She smiled again. For people like Dr. Chin, people who aren't familiar with him will only feel that he's too cold and unapproachable, but after getting to know him, they find that he has the qualities of a warm man. Besides, the profession of a doctor also adds a sacred halo to him, making people instinctively want to get close to him. He has always taken such good care of me. Even though the two of us rarely contact each other, I was the one who took the initiative to call him after returning to China. Speaking of which, he's also an old friend whom I haven't blocked all of my contact numbers. Mo Jingshan was expressionless. You're so interested in him? Jean Wan casually folded her hands under the quilt and casually played with her nails. She said slowly and casually, originally, I thought that since he has been entangled with Shi Nianj for so many years, I didn't have too many thoughts about him. But today, you said that he's still unmarried. Maybe I can take the opportunity to throw an olive branch of love at Dr. Chin. Maybe there's really a chance between us? Mo Jingshan's voice dangerously dragged out. There's no chance between the two of you. Why not? Isn't it easy for a woman to pursue a man? Based on my methods, it's not that easy to pursue a man. No chance? If I haven't tried, how do you know there's no chance? Jean Wan continued to smile. The man by the bedside stared at her with an indifferent expression. His gaze was unkind. However, Jean Wan appeared as though she did not see it. Her eyes shone with interest. Didn't you say that Dr. Chin would come today? In a while, I'll let you see if there's a chance between the two of us. Mo Jingshan unhurriedly raised his handsome brows, calmly watching her. Did I give you too much time to calm down, causing you to think about all these messy things? Jean Wan also raised her brows. Her gaze seemed to carry a smile, but it was like a hidden cat's claws that revealed a sharp tip. Weren't you the one who talked about Dr. Chin first? Mo Jingshan. If you mention his name again, I'll make you cry on this bed until you can't stop. You can try. After taking the opportunity to chase Mo Jingshan out of the bedroom, Jean Wan laid on the bed and quietly picked up her phone. She had just placed the SIM card in and hurriedly hid it. Now that she took it out, she saw the message that Mr. Vince had sent her yesterday. In the past 2 years, although some of the popular trends in the country had gradually converged with those of 7 years later, such as Weibo and WeChat, there were still very few people who used them. At the very least, it would take another year or two for them to become popular. Thus, even though Jean Wan immediately used WeChat, the number of people in her friend list was pitifully small. There were only a few people in the company. Most of her communication with others still relied on text messages. Mr. Vince's message said that he had already returned to High City. However, this message was not as warm as it used to be. In the past, no matter where he went, after saying his location, he would then ask where she was or what she was doing. However, this time, he only said that he had returned to High City, and then there was a full stop. Jean Wan glanced at it and did not know what to reply. She also felt that Mr. Vince's attitude recently seemed a little strange. A person who had been rejected by her for 3 years, but whose enthusiasm did not diminish, suddenly began to deliberately distance himself from her overnight. Although he maintained a calm way of interacting with her, he was careful not to be as warm as before. She didn't feel disappointed just because a person who had always been warm to her suddenly turned cold. In the past few years, because he had helped her, she didn't want to hurt him too much. In fact, this was the most appropriate way for her to get along with him. Chapter 527. Hearing Auntie Chen calling her from outside, Jean Wan got up and went out. I'm going back to High City University to cook for my little son in the afternoon. I'll come back tomorrow. Take good care of yourself. Mr. Amo said that you can't wander around right now, so be good and don't be in a hurry to leave. I'll come back tomorrow to cook for you. Auntie Chen took Jean Wan's hand and said, what do you want to eat? Call me when you've decided. I'll come back tomorrow after buying the ingredients. Jean Wan nodded. I'm fine with anything. It's not that troublesome. You don't have to work so hard. Taking care of yourself is the most important thing. Auntie Chen smiled and chatted with her for a while before leaving. Jean Wan went to the kitchen to pour herself a glass of water. She was about to return to the bedroom when she suddenly heard a knock on the door. She paused. Did Auntie Chen leave something here? Jean Wan quickly walked to the door, holding the glass of water in one hand and opening the door with the other. However, the moment she opened the door, she was stunned to see that the person who came in was Enchanting, who had taken off his white coat and was wearing a white shirt and black trousers. The moment Enchanting saw Jean Wan, he thought he had seen wrongly and took a step back. He raised his eyes to look at the door number and then shifted his gaze to Jean Wan's face. Enchanting? Why was Jean Wan here? This is King Ao Lan International. At this moment, the door of the study opened, and Mo Jingshan came in. Before Jean Wan could say a word to Enchanting, he reached out to take the 2 bottles of good wine from Enchanting's hands and then slammed the door with a pang. Jean Wan stood by the door. What's going on? Wasn't that Dr. Chen? Mo Jingshan's expression was cold. You saw wrongly. He's just a wine delivery man. Enchanting stood by the door. But didn't you say Dr. Chen would come today? That man was clearly him. No, is Enchanting that ugly? Jean Wan, Enchanting, who was still standing outside the door but had heard their conversation through the door. Jean Wan glanced at the 2 bottles of wine in Mo Jingshan's hands and paused. She subconsciously turned back to look at the wall in the living room. 3 years ago, she had bumped into the wine cabinet, and all the precious wine inside had fallen out. She had drunk quite a lot of it. In the following years, Mo Jingshan didn't put any bottle of wine in his apartment at Ao Lan International. He even removed the wine cabinet and replaced it with a shelf for documents. Mo Jingshan's phone rang almost at the same time. He did not need to guess to know it was Enchanting, whose expression was as black as the bottom of a pot. He glanced at his phone and switched it to silent mode. Jean Wan was still absent-mindedly staring at the wine cabinet that had turned into a table shelf. She turned to see the man with a strong aura throw his cell phone on the sofa and meet her eyes. It could be seen that he really did not intend to let Enchanting in. It's rare for Dr. Chen to come here on vacation. He must have something to talk to you about, right? Jean Wan harbored a deep sense of guilt toward Enchanting. She felt that she should do something. Otherwise, it would be too unfair to just lock him outside like this. He glanced at her and unhurriedly placed the wine aside. When he glanced at the year written on the 2 bottles of wine, he took the time to casually reply, "What did I say earlier? You dare to mention a single word about him?" Jean Wan glared at him. She felt that facing a man who had not touched meat for 3 years, anything he said would definitely have a certain degree of threat. How infuriating. Seeing that there was no longer any movement outside, Jean Wan rushed into the bedroom. She had just taken out her phone from under the pillow when she saw a message from Enchanting. Enchanting? Jean Wan's lips twitched. She rushed to reply, "I'm sorry to call you Dr. Chen. Today's incident was purely an accident." Enchanting? How could Jean Wan dare to tell him the words she had casually said to Mo Jingshan? Faced with his speechless expression, she could only send a few question marks. She wanted to cry but had no tears as she replied to him, "There was a misunderstanding earlier." Several minutes later, Enchanting had probably already gone downstairs. He sent another message, "Why are you at Ao Lan International?" Jean Wan's mind was filled with guilt for accidentally hurting Enchanting. She did not carefully look at his message with question marks and continued to reply, "I'm sorry, Dr. Chen T_T. After I leave this place, I'll definitely apologize to you properly." Enchanting, these two lunatics. This old man had specially brought 2 bottles of good wine to watch Mo Jingshan cry. In the end, the moment he arrived, he saw Jin Wan running to open the door. Was this not enough? She even said he was ugly. Damn it. After staying at Aolan International for another night, Jin Wan originally wanted to find an opportunity to enter the study to check if the air conditioner was really broken. If it was really broken, why did Mo Jingshan not call anyone to fix it? In the end, she could not find an opportunity. At night, Mo Jingshan once again entered the bedroom to sleep on the floor. Looking at the man lying on the floor, Jin Wan quietly hid the phone hidden under the pillow deeper. Thankfully, she had turned it off an hour ago. The man's eyes were closed. Even though he was sleeping on the floor, his posture was dignified and elegant, as though he was sleeping on a limited edition mattress. He did not speak up because of her stealthily reaching her hand under the pillow. However, when Jin Wan carefully rolled over with the quilt wrapped around her, the man's lips silently curved in an indulgent smile. The next morning, Mo Jingshan did not have a morning meeting. Auntie Chen came over early to cook. As they were eating, someone knocked on the door. The knock at this time was very sudden. No one else would come to Aolan International. Jin Wan also felt it was strange. She turned to see that Auntie Chen had already gone to open the door, so she continued to sit by the dining table without moving. However, after opening the door, she vaguely heard Auntie Chen's voice. Oh, okay, please wait a moment. Auntie Chen turned and quickly walked over to say, Mr. Mo, there are 2 police officers. They seem to be special police. They say they have something to discuss with you. Hearing the word special police, before Mo Jingshan could speak, Jin Wan had already stood up and walked over. When she arrived at the door, she saw Yen Gu and another person dressed in a police uniform standing outside. She immediately asked in surprise, Yen Gu? How did you find your way here? Yen Gu was clearly surprised that Jin Wan would be here. He paused for a moment before saying, Sister Wan? Previously, after you were kidnapped by the kidnappers, the police were unable to contact you. We found this place through some channels and wanted to come here to give a statement, but why did you? Before Yen Gu could finish speaking, Mo Jingshan's tall and cold figure had already walked out. The moment he saw Mo Jingshan, he realized that Jin Wan seemed to have been staying here for the past 2 days. Yen Ji's eyes instantly widened. What exactly is his relationship with you, Sister Wan? Mo Jingshan stood by the door, expressionless. The woman in front of you is my ex-wife. You're tuning into the Romantic Tales YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.